This was a couple of years ago now. I was still in college. I worked at my local high school in South Jersey on the night shift for some extra money. But unfortunately, the hours meant that I didn't really get to have a life during the week. I get a call from a friend group on a Friday before I headed into work saying that they were going to explore Clinton Road, which was known to be the scariest road in New Jersey. Obviously, I couldn't go, so I told them to let me know how they made out. Later in the night, I get a call from them, though, in a panic, saying that all these crazy things happened to them. They described what happened to them, how they threw coins over Ghost Boy Bridge, and they came back, a ghost truck following them, and the feeling of just being watched. Honestly, I thought that they were just hyping it up because of the fact that I missed out. So it was decided that we'd all go the next night, but this time I got to see it for myself. Something that I'd regret for the rest of my life. Us being from South Jersey, Clinton Road is a bit of a drive for us, about 2 hours, so there was plenty of time for us to get all hyped up and spooked out. Now, I can only describe myself as the manly man of the group, I guess, being 6'5" and 260 pounds. Especially back then, I had the persona of, it's all made up, nothing will scare us. But boy, was I completely wrong. Right when we get there, the entire vibe changed from, oh, we're all going to be spooked to, oh wait, this is actually pretty creepy. The road, it's in the middle of the woods, houses few and far between. The first thing that we see when we get there is a small mini-castle looking building. It's the best that I can describe it. And because of the far ride, we all had to pee at this point, so I went to the left, friend 2, Joe, went straight, and friend 3, Ha, went to the right. Friend 4 was female who stayed behind us in the road. After I was done, I immediately walked back along with Ha, but we noticed that Joe was walking towards the creepy building. I start shouting, asking what he was doing, and he turns back around with the look of shock. Me being completely confused, I ask, "What are you doing walking there?" And Joe swore up and down that I was actually behind the building waving at him to follow me to the building. So naturally, we're all getting pretty freaked out about that. We pull up to the bridge, Ghost Boy Bridge, and I check everyone for coins to make sure that they don't fake it just to scare me. We all throw the coins and, well, nothing happens. See guys, it's just all in your head. Let's go. So we all start walking back to the car, and then I hear clinking. I hear the coins hit the road. We sprint back to check, and we find the coins laying in the road. I was 100% convinced, though, that they were just messing with us, so I had the idea to mark a coin so they couldn't fake it. I threw the coin in the water, waited 5 minutes in silence, and nothing. See guys, let's go. But then, I hear the coins in the road again. I walk back and, well, it was a coin with the same exact markings that I had put on it. I'm extremely freaked out at this point, so we decided to go. Driving down the windy road in a newer sports car, we're all pretty freaked out and just want to leave at this stage. And that's when we see headlights appearing behind us, seemingly out of nowhere. Also, we didn't see them attached to a vehicle per se. I'm no car expert by any means, but I would almost bet my life on it that they were lights on an old truck, getting closer the faster that we went, taking bends at fast speeds that even a new truck wouldn't handle. Suddenly, though, the lights just disappear. So now, all in a panic, we decide to pull over to map our way out. There was dead silence, no lights except our headlights in the woods. And that is when we hear the typical woman ghost moan. And of course, what came with it was the typical woman in a white dress standing in the woods right next to our car, and suddenly she let out the loudest scream that I think I've ever heard. We also began screaming at this point to get out and go, go, go and all that. Eventually, we put the car into gear and we get the heck out of there. Once we make it back to the main roads, we decide to dig a little bit deeper on this road. And apparently, according to the sources that I found at least, the ghost truck tries to make people crash on Dead Man's Curve. Allegedly, there have been numerous bodies buried there from the famous murderer, the Iceman. On our way home, we wanted to go back again the next night, on the Sunday, but we suddenly pass an old rundown church that looks like it hasn't been used in like 50 years. And of course, the sign left out front says, "You need Jesus on Sunday." Safe to say, I never went back, and even to this day, the friend group still refuses to talk about what happened that night on Clinton Road. I do hope that one day we can talk about it again because, I don't know, the whole thing just seems like a memory now, and I just really don't want to forget it. As late teens, early 20s, growing up in South Jersey, my friend group was always getting into ghost hunting on haunted roads and buildings around New Jersey and surrounding areas. But we always had some crazy experiences, I guess you could say, and this one was really no different. During this, we had the original friend group, plus another one of our friends as well. Now one night, brainstorming what to do, we decided to go on a little ghost hunt trip in our area. Everyone knew of our friend group as the ones that would always be getting into these kinds of things, so we would always be getting tipped off by other friends outside of the group as to what places to check out. We were tipped off to do a little haunted road not far from us, and we decided, heck, why not? It's better than nothing and just sitting here. So we all hop in the car and start the little trip towards the road. On the way, we happened to see a Wawa, which, of course, we had to stop at. Per usual, we were always hyping each other up to see if we could spook the others. While waiting in line, I'm messing with one of the friends that's not in the ghost friend group, saying, "You're scared to go, aren't you?" When out of nowhere, we hear, "What's the little one scared of?" I say little because the guys in the friend group were all abnormal-sized humans, the smallest being roughly 6'3" and 240, where the little one was just a normal-sized typical guy. These guys straight up looked like they just didn't belong there, to be honest. Some sort of backroads, Texas chainsaw-looking fellas. But we explained to the guy and his friend that we were going ghost hunting on a road. And simply put, they said, "It's not that scary. If you really want to be scared, go here instead." So we leave, and hesitantly we all agree to actually go to the new hunt instead of the first trip. We get there, middle of the woods. We notice that there are some trees cut down and laying on the sides parallel to the road. Deeper and deeper into the woods, pitch black, and that's when the nervousness is really starting to build. We pull up to this sort of monument to commemorate a plane crash that had apparently happened there years ago. There's dead silence, pitch black. Only the light shining from the moon was our light other than the car. The light shining from the moon was our only light source, other than the car lights, that is. To put a little bit of fear into us as well, we dared the driver to shut the lights off, which was a big mistake. He completely shuts the car off. A few minutes go by and we see this absolutely massive, and I mean massive, shadow crawl from behind the statue and start narrowing in towards us. When I say massive too, I'm 6'5" plus and 260, and this thing had me looking like a third grader. We all started panicking and zoom away into the car. A bit disoriented, we didn't realize that we were driving deeper into the woods, to where we would hit a huge sand opening, in which there were many ways to go from there. In the end, we decided that it was best to turn around and try to map our way out. While doing so, our radio cuts out to almost like an old-time fashion music sort of thing. I happened to look up in confusion, and seconds after that, I see what I can only describe as a white face. Not a typical white face, but almost like a Jabberwocky's mask. Zero expression and almost a see-through body, if that makes sense. Just a face and then another and another. Now, I don't know if it was us just being disoriented and seeing things, or if this really was happening, but we all scream in unison, "Let's get out of here." So we fly out of the sand back on the same road where I had mentioned the trees earlier. Only this time on our way back, the trees, they were no longer parallel to the road, but actually in the middle of the road, blocking our exit. The driver, Joe, in a sports car, mind you, tells us to hold on, and we're driving on the side of the road next to the woods in what I can best describe as basically defying gravity to make our escape. We do manage to scrape through. Mind you, the car was a bit worse for wear afterwards, but we get out of there and we don't look back. Now, I don't know for certain if this place is legitimately haunted, or if we were set up by those two guys earlier in the night, but two things are for certain. One is, I'd bet my life that it's a combination of both a haunting and a bit of a setup. And two, I for sure will never be going back there again to find out. This is the story of my worst hitchhiking experience. This incident was really sketchy, but I still wouldn't give up my love for hitchhiking. I'm a 21-year-old, 20 at the time, man from Finland. So this happened on the 2nd of December last year in Kalamata, Greece. I had been hitchhiking for quite a while at that point. I had started from Budapest and had hitchhiked through 7 different countries with only ever positive outcomes. The story begins around 11 a.m. on Saturday. So some hours before I had awoken in my hammock, which was hung up behind the castle ruins, in the only place that had trees that weren't someone else's olive trees. I was tired from the lack of sleep caused by the cold night and early wake-up by noises of the busy market across the street. And after a quick tour of the town and some breakfast, it was time for hitchhiking. I made a sign with the words Athens and Sparta in Greek. I was standing by a road leading to a roundabout where the first exit goes around Arapoli, with the second towards Sparta and the third towards Athens. A lot of cars drove by, but nearly all of them took the first exit. It took at least an hour for the first car to stop. It was this small, quite old, worn-out white car, and driving it was an older guy, around 60, who looked a little dirty, I guess. Greasy hair, some teeth missing, and big nose filled with visible blackheads. He didn't really speak English, but I could understand that he was going to Sparta. I was a bit frustrated by the fact that pretty much all of the cars were going towards Arapoli, so I thought this might be the only chance, and so I jumped in. We are trying to have a conversation, but without a shared language, it's pretty much impossible. We introduce ourselves, and I try to explain where I'm from. He smokes and offers me a cigarette, but I refuse it. We drive just shy of 6 kilometers before the guy suddenly makes a left turn, and we end up in his yard of all places. He stops the car, gets up, and signals me to follow, so I do. I take my bags and feel a bit confused. It's a small house on the mountains surrounded by sheep and olive trees. There's a dog sleeping in the sun, but it doesn't seem to be bothered by us at all. We walk to this balcony or terrace that surrounds his house. I put my bags inside of his house and join him sitting on the balcony. He lights up another cigarette and asks if I want to eat something or maybe take a shower. I refuse, and with the help of Google Translate, I ask why we aren't going to Sparta. He answers that I can sleep at his house and he'll drive me there tomorrow. I try to explain that I would like to get to Sparta or even to Athens today, so staying at his place isn't really an option. I'm pointing out that there's not that many cars going past this house, like one every 15 minutes, and only some 4 or 5 hours of daylight left, so every minute is valuable to me. He doesn't really seem to understand me, so I get up and I walk through the door to grab my bags. I put my backpack on and pick up my other bag. I turn over and see him inside. I try to walk out, but he stops me and guides me to the side. He then locks the door and turns to me. At this moment, I'm not panicking or anything because I assume that this is a form of hospitality and he's just doing this jokingly to offer me some food or whatnot. I keep saying no to him, but he doesn't seem to care. Now he's standing right in front of me and I'm starting to feel very disturbed by his presence. For some reason too, I keep staring at his blackhead-filled nose. The image still haunts me, in fact. He opens his mouth and raises his right hand in a sort of loose fist in order to show me some blowjob motion. I'm still saying no to him. He suddenly grabs me by the crotch though, and I can feel this cold tingling sensation shivering through my body as my hair suddenly stands on end. I keep saying no, and I start to raise my fist in order to hit him. We stand like this for a couple of seconds, and thank God he lets go. I'm still feeling the urge to hit him, but I don't. He asks, no sex, and I almost shout out no at him in a tone that makes it sound like I'm questioning the question itself. He then opens the door, and I'm suddenly free. I walk out, feeling so creeped out by the experience. I walk past the dog to the road and I see two pickup trucks on the other side of the road. The trucks are surrounded by a group of hunters carrying shotguns on their shoulders. This makes me instantly feel a lot safer. I keep walking by the road for a while before a car passes me by. It's quite warm and I'm in the middle of nowhere, so I empty one of my water bottles and turn it upside down, showing it to the cars passing by, so they would think that I'm out of water. This works and the second car stops. Eventually I get to Sparta and later that day to Athens safely, but I felt disgusting until I got to take a shower. All the kindness I had experienced while hitchhiking before this event had made me too comfortable, I guess, and maybe I'd let my guard down or whatever. I think humans are good by nature, but probably trusting every stranger is a bit of a stretch, right? Stranger danger, in my opinion, is still overrated, though. I'm quite a lean guy, too, and not that strong, so I was lucky that the situation didn't end up worse. Though I do think that I could have beaten that also very lean shepherd grandpa. As a safety measure, I carried a knife with me too, but it wasn't on me at that moment of the incident. Also, the knife could have made the situation worse. Obviously, I wouldn't have done anything unless it was absolutely necessary. My mind was running like 1,000,000 miles an hour during and after this experience, and I thought about everything, how it could have turned out in the worst case. I thought about beating the guy, telling the incident to the hunters and calling the police, but in the end I ended up doing nothing and just sort of walked away. I hope karma gets to him eventually, but who knows. After this experience, I still think hitchhiking is the best way to travel, and I definitely am not giving it up, but I certainly am a lot more careful about how I do it. I'm from a small town that houses 3 different elementary schools, and only one middle school and a high school, connected by the gymnasium and a tunnel between the 2 buildings. I had lived there my entire life, and I went to a different school than most other people mentioned in this story. Now, back when I was in middle school, I had a litany of bullies who loved making every moment of my day a living hell. They did pretty much everything that you could think of, ranging from pranks in the middle of class to downright physical assault even. But all of them were nothing compared to this one girl that I met at the beginning of 7th grade, whom I'm going to refer to as Sadie. Sadie was a stereotypical mean girl in every sense of the word. Loved fashion, had a gaggle of friends willing to do her bidding, and every guy was into her or wanted her. She was the kid with the highest amounts of detentions, argued a lot with the teachers, and the principal pretty much did nothing about her actions. She also made a habit of having fun with some specific kids, which included me. I was a plus-sized kid at the time, a scaredy cat, gullible, and a bit of a pushover as well, but I did try to do well in school and I just kept to myself. But that didn't do much at all. As soon as Sadie took notice of me, she took it upon herself to make sure every time that we even saw each other, she'd make me miserable. At the beginning, it wasn't anything much. She started rumors about me, talking about me online. I didn't have social media yet, so I didn't find that out until much later. And in school as well, she said things, and threw things at me that ranged from her garbage to one of her textbooks. It wasn't terrible at first. Sadie was annoying, sure, but I had workarounds, so I just ignored her. But when other kids saw that I wasn't going to fight back, they joined in and took things way too far. Almost daily, I had been chased in the halls, ganged up on in the bathrooms, had my food stolen, gotten blamed by the teachers for their dumb actions in class, and many other things. These kids, they had me on edge and feeling practically worthless for the entire school year, to the point of me considering just running away to avoid the heck out of going to school. Why didn't I tell the school, you may ask? Well, I tried, dozens of times. Teachers, guidance counselors, even the principal. But they didn't care. The school was honestly not the best, and they were pretty negligent to everything that didn't involve funds, sports events, and GPA for the year. So they gave no heed to me when I tried to tell them what was going on with Sadie and her lackeys. These are some of their real responses from the incidents that happened, though. When I had gotten my backpack thrown down the stairs and a calculator inside that I brought from home got broken, "It's your property, your problem," is what they said. When Sadie had written a fat joke alongside of a slur on my locker door in permanent marker, you have no evidence that it was her. When Sadie's boy toy and his friends cornered me outside the changing rooms for gym to ask me for something, they were probably just kidding around. All of them were spearheaded by Sadie, who was practically in charge that year, and nothing she did was getting her into trouble. Summer could not come fast enough that year, and by the time the 7th grade was over, they let those kids get away with so much that I honestly gave up on trying to get outside help at that point. As I got some personal help that summer, I decided that things would be different by the time that I had to go back to school for the following year. I was not going to be Sadie's personal punching bag anymore, in other words. When 8th grade started up, I was ready. I learned some MMA self-defense, I defended myself vocally, I wasn't so quiet anymore, and I started to fight back. And, what did you know, it worked. None of the old bullies from last year even looked my way again, except for Sadie, who still tried to pull her usual stunts. But the longer I showed her that I didn't care, the more it seemed to get to her. Honestly, it felt like ample revenge to all of the stuff that she put me through last year. Sadie, however, would not let it go for the life of her. I didn't know it then, but this whole act of hers would end up taking a really bad turn. One day, I was walking to the gym with Sadie following close behind me. She didn't share a gym class with me, but she did like following me around in between classes and trying to get a rise out of me. This day, however, was not great for me, and I don't exactly remember why now, but I was stressed out and I kept getting really ticked off over whatever went wrong that day. Sadie following behind, trying out different insults and comments about me, it must have just sent me over the edge. In a quick motion, I stopped walking, spun around, pushed Sadie backwards and spit towards her, with it landing on her leg. I told her to just get lost and to leave me alone. I didn't know what I was really expecting her reaction to be, but it sure as heck wasn't what she did. Sadie just sort of stood there, frozen, staring at me. I expected her to be coughing up blood from rage or her screaming or anything at all, but instead she just stood there, as if a deer in the headlights. I didn't think about it at that time, as I left for gym not long after and eventually forgot about it. But after school, I was walking across the school building to head for the parking lot next to the high school building. Everything felt normal until I saw Sadie not far behind me. I didn't think anything weird of it, so I ignored it and kept walking, until I noticed that she was taking the same path I was to the buses. This wouldn't be too odd, I guess, if she actually rode the buses at all. Sadie walked to and from school every single day. If not that, someone would always come and pick her up. But the carpool lot was in the opposite direction of the buses. I took a different path than my normal route, around the back of the school. I looked back to check and, yep, Sadie was taking the exact same path I was, and she stopped walking every time that I looked back at her. I began picking up the pace a bit, and from behind I could hear her running to catch up to me. By the time that I was nearing the bus lot, she was somewhere around maybe 10 feet right behind me, still jogging to follow me. I definitely did not want her to learn which bus was mine, nor did I want her to follow me home, so I decided to try and fake her out. I jumped onto a different bus, much to the dismay of the driver, and Sadie ran in after me. After she got in the front, the bus driver yelled at her about something, and I ran off and raced to my actual bus, which was all the way on the other end, where this particular bus was. I got in, and the bus drove away just as Sadie got off to see where I went. Now, the next day I didn't see Sadie anywhere at school. Not in any of the classes, not at lunch, not even after school either. I asked, but nobody knew where she went. This went on for the rest of the week. The bus incident took place on a Monday, and the disappearing act happened on the Tuesday. By Thursday, I began to relax about the whole thing. I still didn't understand what Sadie was doing with the whole bus incident, but as long as she was gone, things felt, well, pretty okay. That is, until Friday afternoon came along. Like the last few days, Sadie wasn't there, so I was pretty relaxed for the most of it. When the end of the school day came, I was about to walk out of the front doors to the building when something stopped me. I just had a sudden horrible feeling in my stomach, telling me not to go outside. I had no idea where that came from, but I thought it was just my leftover anxiety playing tricks on me, so I headed out anyway, not still twisting. The middle school and the high school were all part of one connecting path system, which means that we all had hallways and walkways connecting both the main middle school and the main high school buildings, with one long sidewalk path out front. The parking lot where I had to walk to my bus was on the opposite end of this long sidewalk, which ran in front of both the middle school and in front of the high school too. This can make for a pretty long walk, and the doors leading into the high school, often flooded with students, make for some interesting obstacles. This would all come into play when this happened too. So I just walked down the outside stairs to the sidewalk when I saw someone run around a corner from the building. I look over and it was Sadie, looking completely ticked off, as bad as a rabid dog, full sprinting right towards me. I bolted, running faster than I ever had in my whole life, running off nothing but pure adrenaline and fear. Sadie was catching up quickly behind me though, and all I could do was run and pray for help. I dodged between crowds of kids and just tried to lose her somewhere in the masses, not caring at all if I bumped into other people, only afraid that Sadie was still behind me. By the time that I reached the buses, I didn't see her anywhere, so I stopped and nearly collapsed to catch my breath. I felt relief for only a second, until she popped out of nowhere from the side of the crowd and lunged at me. Sadie grabbed me by my hair and backpack, swinging me around in a circle as I tried to get her off of me. She kept pulling and jerking so much that I felt my hair being ripped out at some points, but she kept going. I screamed for help, kicking and punching blindly in Sadie's direction, but either nobody wanted to get involved or were too scared to break us up because there was nobody who came forward. Sadie let go of my hair to reach for something behind her, and what happened next was only a miracle. My older brother was walking out of high school drinking a soda when he saw the scene and ran to help. He was the only one who knew about Sadie and recognized her when he had gotten to school in the mornings. He threw his soda at Sadie's head, which startled her enough to let me go and drop whatever she was holding. I grabbed my brother and we took off for the bus, making it just before it drove off. After we found a seat, I looked back outside, and what I saw still gives me chills. Sadie was on the ground, arms pinned by a teacher, and right on the ground next to her was an open hunting knife. And I knew without a doubt that it was definitely hers because of the sound that I had heard when she dropped it earlier. Next Monday, I got a call down to the office where my brother was also waiting. We got pulled into the counsellor's office where there were 2 police officers waiting. Apparently, after we ran, a high school teacher saw Sadie picking up the weapon and apprehended her while another person called the police. They got Sadie into interrogation and now they needed to hear what happened from me. I practically broke down right there and then and told them everything. What Sadie did to me last year, what I almost did because of her torment, the bus incident the week prior, and what happened on the sidewalk too. My brother, he put his arm around me while I just sat there nearly sobbing my words out. The police and the counsellor just sat there writing down what I said, but they looked on sympathetically. One of the officers asked me if I would like to tell my parents so they could press charges. At this point, I just wanted everything to end about this horrible situation and to just be done with it, so I just told them to do whatever they wanted. I just wanted this to stop. The counsellor could tell that I was already upset enough, so he sent me back to class and me and my brother made a promise to never speak about this again. Sadie ended up getting into juvie for the rest of the school year, all the way until halfway through the second semester of freshman year of high school. The school, it also had some changes to it too. Police officers were now on duty during school hours in the middle and high schools. We had stricter policies with bullying, and kids could now stay with teachers before, during, after school if they needed to. I never did see Sadie again after that. Not even in passing, in fact. I later learned from one of her old friends that after senior year, she dropped out to get her GED because the incident on her police record meant college was, well, impossible. It's been over 9 years since that day on the sidewalk, and I'll admit that this is honestly not as bad as what other kids probably had to go through, but I still feel the trauma from that time in middle school and especially from what Sadie did to me. After middle school, I had developed depression, severe social anxiety, and PTSD from the bullies. I can't fully blame the situation for everything, as maybe if I just pushed a little bit harder with the teachers and the principal, maybe this wouldn't have happened in the first place, but eventually things did end up getting better. I just wish that I could go back to my 13-year-old self that had to endure all of that, to say that everything was going to be okay. I'm doing better now. I'm looking into therapy. I'm in university right now too, and I cannot be prouder of how far I've come. Thankfully, I'm doing better now, and I'm looking into therapy too. Also, I'm in university right now, and to be quite honest, I couldn't be prouder of how far I've come. My female friend came to visit me for a long weekend, and I, a 22-year-old female, won't be letting her stay with me ever again. We were friends for less than 3 months before we both moved to separate states and continued our friendship virtually until now. It has been a healthy friendship, I guess, with open communication. We have had our disagreements, but mostly always talked it out and moved on. They mostly revolve around her believing that I don't open up enough, and for me, she does things that are inconsiderate at times, like be jealous of my long-term friends, to their faces, and have an odd attitude problem at times. Only has been shown maybe 3 times, but still. She can also be a bit obsessive, and she gets upset when I don't text her for more than a day. She's got loads of my photos saved to her phone and remembers every little thing about me, and even has a list of my interests. And look, I know that's a bit weird, but I've seen it as endearing. That is, until now. So, the first day of the trip was great. She was bubbly and brought me a gift with a sweet note of appreciation. We went clubbing and headed to bed separately for the night. This is where things got a bit weird. Now, remember, we slept separately. Well, I woke up and she was in my bed. But not in my bed. She was sitting upright on the top of the blankets next to me with her feet straight out and her back against my headboard while looking forward. I was startled and said, "Oh," instinctively. She just looked at me. She never said that she was waiting for me to wake up or maybe she was uncomfortable on the couch. Nothing. Then she left my room. I have no clue how long she was actually sitting there for. Day 2, in the morning, we walked the city where she was engaged and wanting to hold my hand while we were out and about. By midday, still day 2, her attitude had shifted completely, and she is near mute now. She isn't conversing with me, enjoying any activities, or even smiling anymore. At the bar, arcade, or even at home watching movies. You know how those driving games take a sort of silly little photo for your profile pic on the leaderboard? I was blowing a kissy face in mine. I glanced at hers and even snapped a pic without her noticing. Her head was tilted forward looking up at the camera, and she was blank-faced, and you can mostly see the whites of her eyes. It was like the film poster of a horror film. See The Orphan 2009 for what it may have looked like. Anyways, for the rest of the trip, she continued to not smile. She was cold to every service worker. She responded with one-word answers, otherwise complained about any and everything. I asked, "Are you okay?" a couple of times, and she replied, "I'm fine," avoiding eye contact every time. Car rides were silent, dinners were silent. The final day, I drove her to the airport at 3 a.m. I asked if she enjoyed her visit, and she said it was okay, it was fine. I told her that I enjoyed having her. She boarded her flight and she left. Now, I cannot figure out what caused this 180-degree shift. I mean, I paid for everything, took her to all sorts of events that she wanted to go to, and even took a day off, my first sick day ever, to take her to more. I felt myself overcompensating because I felt insecure of being a terrible host or something. I've had several friends stay with me and express to me that they enjoyed themselves so much that they never wanted to leave. I don't believe I did anything so wrong to ruin this trip or whatever. When she arrived home, though, she didn't contact me, but she posted photos and videos of me captioned "mine" on her social media. I haven't brought this conversation to her yet. All of my family and friends believe that I narrowly avoided a Selena Yolanda, a Lifetime film situation, and that I was potentially with someone very unstable. What do you guys think? So I've never shared this with anyone except my wife and my mother. Growing up, we lived in an old townhouse complex. I always used to wake up terrified, unable to move anything except for my eyes, and there would be a man standing at the foot of my bed, wearing a cowboy hat, arms crossed. He would just stand there and then he would be gone, and then I could move again. This happened to me from the ages of about 6 to 12 until we moved. Not every night, but probably maybe about once a month or so, I would say. I never told anyone about it for years. I just kept it to myself. In my early 20s, I was visiting my parents and finally told my mother about what used to happen. She was absolutely floored, and then went on to tell me when we lived in that house, it used to happen to her as well, for about the same amount of years until we moved and they bought the house that they now live in. I'm not quite sure how to explain the feeling of both relief and terror that I felt knowing that A, I wasn't crazy, and B, this man was also troubling my mother. My dad worked in a remote work camp and was gone 15 days at a time. This only ever happened when he was away. We talked to him about it after we discovered that we both had these experiences, and he thinks that we're nuts. Anyway, I just wanted to share this. I drove past the old house that this happened to me in, and even just being close to it, man, it gave me the creeps. I remember once my grandmother came to visit when we lived there, and I'll never forget that she just looked around and said, "This is a busy place." Another strange thing that used to occur in the same house is that we had 2 cats and they used to just sort of sit at the bottom of the stairs and look up at the landing, like they were watching someone. The landing at the top, it overlooked the stairs, and I used to feel like someone was looking down at me when going up them all the time. The one cat that we had, he would just sit there sometimes for like an hour or more just staring. The bedrooms were on the top floor. Anyways, thanks for listening, and it feels good to have this finally off my chest. I'll also add that I had no other experiences since then. When we first moved, I was terrified that whatever used to haunt my nights would find me again. After all, the house that my parents bought, it was only about 2 blocks away. So I've spent about 2/3 of my life trying to debunk this one or come up with a reasonable explanation. When I was in 5th grade, I rode the bus with a girl who was a grade or 2 below me. We lived on opposite sides of a rather large apartment complex, but could still walk to each other's homes if we wanted to. Her name was Micah. Micah was born in Romania and had moved here a few years prior to me meeting her. She had heterochromia. Micah had brown eyes, but half of one of her irises was blue. This is relevant later. Now, her family was off, for a better word. I went over to her apartment a few times to hang out with her and remembered seeing a lot of unusual decor in her home. Lots of candles, a few altars, and a lot of taxidermy as well. Her mother would get very upset any time that she brought friends over, so typically she would sneak myself and a few of our other friends in anytime her mum was out shopping. But my mother was pregnant at the time and often felt sick, so I never brought my friends over unless she was out shopping or at the doctor's or whatever. And so she had never met Micah. A lot of the other kids were scared of her or felt sort of uneasy around her, I guess. None of our mutual friends could explain why. I did too at times, I'll admit, for some unknown reason, but as a fellow outcast, we stuck by each other's sides in the end. After a few months of knowing each other, she started telling me that her family followed a belief system similar to paganism. I forgot exactly what she called their religion, but it wasn't Wicca or pagan or any other common one, for lack of a better word again, spiritual belief system. And Micah started claiming that she had special powers. I immediately called bull on this and told her to prove it, and she responded by saying that she would shapeshift into a cat and visit me later that evening. My family and I lived on the 3rd floor of our apartment building. There were no fire escapes, balconies, or anything like that. We barely even had window ledges. As a side note too, I do love cute stuff. Hello Kitty, Care Bears, My Little Pony, all that good stuff. My best friend at the time was very into fashion and loved to act like a high schooler, and the few times that she saw me in cartoon PJs, she made jokes. So I stopped wearing anything like that to school or sleepovers, almost a full year prior to me meeting Micah. I went to bed at my normal bedtime of 9:30, wearing some Care Bear pajamas that my mum had bought me a week prior. Nobody had seen me in them aside from my parents. And around 3 a.m. that night, I woke up to hear scratching at my window. I jumped out of bed, looked out of my window, and saw a black cat staring directly at me. The cat was sitting on the very thin window ledge and raised its paw at me, as if it was waving at me. Freaked out, I told myself that it was a dream, and so I went back to sleep, I guess. That morning, while my mum was cooking breakfast, she asked if I had heard anything weird outside the night before, so I asked what she meant. I saw the weirdest thing last night. I heard scratching at my window. I got up to see what it was, and I saw a black cat on the window ledge. It looked like it was trying to open my window. I sat there in silence, unsure of what to say. My mum continued. I was afraid it was going to fall, so I brought it inside, carried it downstairs, and put it outside. But you should have seen its eyes. It had one eye that was half blue. I've never seen a cat like that before. I instantly felt so sick that I couldn't speak or finish my breakfast. Not wanting to approach Micah after all of this, I stood off to the side away from all the other kids until she walked up to me. "Hey, Gloomy Bear. Why didn't you let me in last night?" I was completely stunned. I could have died. At least your mum was nice enough to take me downstairs." I stopped hanging around her as much after that. Our building caught on fire a few weeks after all this happened, and we ended up moving a few towns away. I haven't seen or heard from her since then, and to this day, my mum still remembers that cat. She'll mention it in passing every few years and make comments about how weird it was that a cat could have gotten up on that ledge and was trying to seemingly get in like that. For the last 20 years, I've been racking my brain looking for any explanation as to how this could have all happened, but I just haven't been able to come up with one. So, if anyone has one, then genuinely, I would love to hear it. This all took place in the mid-90s in a little town called Ottawa in Kansas. These are all true stories of experiences that I had while living in that house. I'll be sharing these experiences in chronological order, but first I'll describe the layout of the house. So, from front to back, you walk into the den, and moving forward you enter into the kitchen with a doorway to your right that leads to a bathroom and a master bedroom. If you continue through the kitchen, it leads to a dining room and living room on the left. If you go through the dining room further to the back of the house, it leads to a doorless room that we used for a computer room, and then 2 more bedrooms in the back. I share all of this because, over the years, family members switched rooms. So, the first experience happened not long after moving in. At the time, my mum had started a new relationship and we moved in with him. His mum also lived there as well, and she had the master bedroom at the front of the house. My mum and her new boyfriend, they had the room at the very back of the house, and I was in the room next to them. Now one night, I heard all of my mum's music boxes just start playing out of nowhere. She had these painted clowns and such that sat on satin pillows and played music. They weren't creepy to me until this night, I suppose, but anyways, I hear them just all going off, and in my kid mind, I'm just sort of ticked off that my mum is in there playing when she told me that it was bedtime. But they just kept playing and playing, all at the same time. It was years later that she, my mum, finally told me that she wasn't playing with them. The second thing that happened was probably the scariest experience of my life. I was still in one of the back bedrooms, but by this time my step-grandma had moved out, so my mum and her boyfriend were in the master bedroom at the front of the house. I was alone in the back. I have siblings, but they were back and forth between my mum and dad, so at this point I was the only kid there. My mum and we had just come home from Walmart, and she had gotten me The Nightmare Before Christmas on VHS. And yes, I'm showing my age there, but it was late, so she and I could watch it the next day. I put it in my dresser and I went to bed. It was still wrapped in the cellophane and still in the Walmart bag. And as I was falling asleep, I heard the plastic of the bag. Even with my nightlight on, I couldn't see anything. I was scared though, so I gently tossed my big white cat Muffin Man onto the floor at the foot of my bed in the hopes that he would scare whatever it was away. And instead, he literally took off. I kept hearing the plastic and was literally petrified. I couldn't even scream, I was so scared. I eventually woke up, and when I did, the movie was now out of the case and on the floor. And honestly, I simply cannot explain how that happened. Now, the third experience, I had a friend over, and this story still gives her chills as well. She had recently lost her mum in a car accident, and this was another attempt of her sleeping over. She would try, but she missed her mum and just wanted to be with her family. But this time, she actually stayed the whole night. The experience itself wasn't scary for me, but I had a poster of The Crow. It was my first poster ever, and I loved it, but when I woke up, it was tacked upside down. I certainly wouldn't have done that to Brandon Lee, and when my friend saw that, she turned white and she never spent the night again. I know it wasn't her, and at that time my little brother was living with us again, but there's no way that he could have reached the tacks at the top of the poster like that, so again, I just don't know how this happened. Now, my fourth experience was probably the second scariest one. We had cats at that time, but one day, in the middle of the day, my brother was down the street playing football at the school and I was home alone with my mum. I was in the computer room and she was in the kitchen. The day before, my little brother had been pretending that he had caught an alien. He had a huge plaster ET piggy bank that was probably like 1.5 to 2 feet tall. It was pretty ridiculous really, but he had a rope tied around it because he had caught it, you know. So I'm at the computer and all of a sudden I hear a loud crash from the rooms in the back, and here comes my cat Jara, with the other end of the rope tied around her tail. Mind you, Jara was a tortie. They're kind of known for just being all around crazy, but for anything to keep that cat still long enough to tie something around her tail, well, that's kind of mind-boggling. But something had definitely tied it around her tail like that. I mean, it wasn't an accident, there was a bow and everything, and broke off E.T.'s head in the process. Again, I cannot explain any of these experiences. My mum ended up having a priest come in and bless our home. He stole my stone collection and Dreamcatcher. Still pretty ticked off about that, by the way. But we did a little bit of research and found that the property had actually burned down in the past. I cannot remember the dates now, but I don't think that the spirit or whatever it was demonic. I actually think that it was a little girl named Margaret. But I'm curious as to what everyone else thinks. I'll do a little bit more digging and see if I can find any more info about the fire, but yeah, really at this point, that's all I've got. I was 11 years old when this happened. I'm female and currently 24. I was visiting my dad and stepmom over the summer in Saskatchewan, Canada. My dad worked long days during the week, so on her day off, he planned for my stepmom to take my sister, 8 at the time, and I out for a day to get some bonding time in with us, as we didn't know her super well yet. She took us to get our nails done, to the mall, and on the way home we stopped at a McDonald's. We planned on eating inside the restaurant, but it was very busy, so my stepmom asked my sister and I to find a table and wait there while she went to the counter to order our food. It was around then that I noticed this rough, older-looking woman, possibly 60s or 70s, looking towards the direction of the table my sister and I were seated at. All I could remember is thinking, she looked like a drugged-out Susan Boyle. She looked possibly homeless and addicted, so I didn't give her much of a thought, letting her do her own thing, and I just tried to talk to my sister about random stuff. Once my stepmom came back to the table, this woman was also seemingly already approaching us, and then stopped beside us. She just said hello, so we all kind of said hi back and tried to ignore her. She asked if we were my stepmom's daughters, so she says they're my stepdaughters, trying to be simple to kind of shut her down. The lady says that we were beautiful girls and begins to walk towards the door. She stops one last time and asks, how old are they? We had the impression that she was on her way out, so my stepmom just says to her like 11 and 8. Her eyes, though, they lit up and she looked at me with a sort of strange look. I've always wanted an 11-year-old, she said. I'd buy her from you. That definitely crossed a line, so my stepmom finally tells her that we're trying to eat lunch and asks her what she's even saying in a somewhat aggressive tone. The lady got one last look at me, and then she finally left. She definitely didn't have the money to buy me, even if I was for sale anyway, so I wasn't too worried. But I do think that she was possibly on some drugs and not in her right mind. But knowing my shy self at 11, I wouldn't have known how to get rid of this lady if she had tried to talk to us without my stepmom there. We weren't super close then, but I respected her a lot after that day for being ready to protect us, even in a minor situation like this. This actually happened just last night for me. I was almost home after a long day of traveling, and it was approximately 1 in the morning as I rounded a corner and stopped at the intersection right near my home. The light was red, and as I slowed to a stop, out of the corner of my eye, I saw 3 people on the sidewalk. They were all dressed in black and wearing white face masks or face paint or something, maybe a combination of the two even. One was crouched on the ground, while the other 2 were standing crooked. They were still as statues when I came to a stop, but when I looked at them, they all started crawling or walking towards me. I was absolutely exhausted at this stage, and apparently my instinct in moments of terror is to just laugh and shake my head like I was in on a joke or whatever. They were super close to my car in the end, but thankfully the light turned green and I was able to get out of there before they reached my car. Since you could see the corner of my house from the intersection, I ended up just driving for quite a while and then turning around once it felt like enough time had passed, so that they wouldn't follow my car pulling into the street that I lived on. I imagine it was just some teens playing a prank or whatever, but afterwards I was thinking about it being a school night, and most people wouldn't be having sleepovers in the middle of the week or anything. I'm debating whether it's worth calling the non-emergency line to report it, just in case. Regardless, I won't be going out past sundown for quite some time, and I'll likely invest in some door lock reinforcements too after that, because honestly, who knows what they were up to. I've always been aware, growing up in a house of old-time Romani people gives you that. I say aware in respect of that, to quote Shakespeare, that there are more things in heaven and earth. There's places I've been where I'll never go again, and here's one of the last of them. I'm going back 30 years or more to a day in the summer holidays where I found myself alone. I'd walked my girlfriend home, and it was the time where the light starts to fade and the night starts to close in. It would have been around 8 or 9, I suppose. It was still quite light, and looking back, there was no need to be worried about, well, anything really. But as is the case with many things, the worry, it started anyway. I took a shortcut through a park which led me onto a path that cuts through some woods. The light was good enough for me to walk the path and stay on through to the other side. I've spoken about the feeling of something watching you before with others, and if you take anything from hearing this, then it's that this feeling that you get is rarely wrong. Mine, in fact, has never been wrong. So, as I walked down the path, it opened up into a small field full of long grass, yellow-colored as the sun had been quite merciless with it. When that feeling, it just struck me hard. Now, I was at an age where I thought that I could have handled pretty much anything, so I stopped and surveyed around to see what or who was there with me. That's when I heard a sharp whistle, the kind where a dog may come running. I looked around to see where it had come from, but there was no one there. I just started to walk again, thinking that the whistle must have carried from the park or whatever. Then, I caught something from the corner of my eye in the grass, a streak of white, just slow enough for me to catch it. I whirled on the spot, but there was nothing there. I shout, "Hello?" No answer. So I carry on walking. I'm getting nearer to the far edge of the field now, and that's when I heard, clear as day, literally to my back, "You're not leaving so soon?" I quickly turned again, thinking that somebody was there, but there was nothing there, and no one. Fear is a funny thing, and the realization that you could be in trouble, coupled with fear, is a horrible thing. I've always been told from being very young that nothing can hurt you that's passed on, so armed with that knowledge, I just carried on walking. I was scared, but I hunched my shoulders with my hands in my pockets and watched my feet, glancing up for the gap in the fence to get out of there. Only, it wasn't there. I don't know how, but I must have turned around one too many times, and I must have threw myself off by quite a ways from where I should have been. And now I'm a little bit more scared. I am definitely not prone to irrationality, so this was not right at all. And it was then that, on the breeze, I heard a distinct laugh, or more of a chuckle maybe. I started to jog, this time keeping my eye line on the gap in the fence, and I fell down. I say fell because it felt more like I was tripped, but maybe that was adrenaline, I'm not too sure. Whatever the case may be, my memory gets a bit hazy there because in the dying light, I swear that I saw a man, just an outline silhouetted by the setting sun. But he was there, dog at his feet with a long walking stick like a shepherd's crook. I sat up and, for the first time in my life, I realized that my family wasn't as crazy as I thought they were. It's a humbling experience, really. And I bounced onto my feet like Jackie Chan, and that jog quickly turned into a dead sprint. I knew in my head and heart that I'd seen something that wasn't right, and I needed to get out of the way as fast as my legs would carry me. The very last thing that I heard, or thought I heard, was, "Don't be a stranger, lad." Like I said, there's places that should really be left alone, as the things there want you to come and visit. After that, even with my mates, hanging around on that park, I always felt watched. I'd look down that path and I swear that I'd hear laughter. They built some warehouses on that land eventually, so I suppose it's not somewhere to worry about these days. I still tell my boy about things like this that happened to me when I was younger, and he always rolls his eyes and sometimes laughs. And who knows, I might take him there one day and see what happens, just to see. This happened about 5 years ago. So I had just gotten out of a 2-year-long relationship, living in the city I moved to my then boyfriend for. After he left, I felt lonely and heartbroken. I was stuck in the apartment that we had shared, so I downloaded Tinder to chat to guys as a way of coping with the breakup. There I matched with this guy. He was about 4 years older than me. He was extremely handsome and charming. He was very much into fitness and had an amazing body. After talking for a few days, he asked me to meet, and so we did. He came over to my house, and I was immediately attracted to him. He was a bad boy type, the kind I usually fall for, but he was also very sweet in the way that he talked to me. He kept complimenting me and doing sweet stuff to me. And after a few days of meeting, we ended up having sex, and it was honestly the best that I'd ever had. I felt this intense chemistry between us. We started hanging out and doing it a lot, in fact. At the time, I did smoke weed a lot. I knew that he smoked too and did some other things as well. I didn't really care much at the time, but eventually, he would keep asking me to hang out pretty much every day, begging me to come over because he missed me. When I told him that I was too tired, he would bribe me with stuff like saying that he would give me massages, weed, dinner, romantic things, give me the best night, etc. He didn't like it when I told him no. He would sometimes get angry even, send me a bunch of messages just pleading for me to come over. After every time that I'd been to his house, he would shower me with love via messages. He was so romantic, saying that I made him feel so amazing, that there was something special about me and that he loved being with me. He would often shower me with compliments, but then get angry when I said that I didn't have time to hang out with him. Now, at some point I was at his house. He got a phone call from someone. After he hung up, he told me that I had to go upstairs and hide because his baby mama was coming over. He didn't want her to see me because she was crazy. He told me some stories of crazy stuff that she had apparently done, and I believed him. He was very convincing, and I believe that this happened twice. Now, I know that I should have seen the red flags. I probably did to some extent, but I didn't care much. I kept hanging out with him a lot, even though I figured out that he was heavy on drugs. And one day, I was at his house and we had done the deed. I had smoked a lot and he was on some stuff. He wanted to go again, but he got frustrated that he couldn't get it up. He got mad and kind of blamed it on me not being firm enough on the grip. He kind of yelled at me to squeeze it harder, and he just kept getting more frustrated. Obviously, I felt uncomfortable and wanted to leave, but he wanted me to stay. He tried to continue, but it just didn't work. I was extremely uncomfortable and felt very embarrassed. After a while, I told him that I wanted to leave. He then told me to give back the weed that he gave me, as is his mind. It was his payment to me being with him. And at that, I was absolutely furious, and so I just grabbed my stuff and I walked out the door. He followed me, and at first he walked calmly about 30 meters behind me, begging me to stay with him, asking where I was going, and I just kept walking and saying no. But he then ran towards me. I picked up my phone to call a friend of mine because I could tell that he was getting aggressive. And then I turned around and saw him literally tear his shirt open and began stomping towards me. He grabbed my phone out of my hands, then kicked me in the stomach so hard that I fell into a ditch. He then smashed my phone to the ground and told me, "You're done." I thought that he was going to beat me up at this stage, but then it looked like he was actually trying to contain himself for a second, and just turned around and left. Obviously, I was mortified by what he had done. I ran away shaking. I can't even remember how I got home, but somehow I did. I was able to borrow a phone from someone and called my friend, I think, and he came over and I had bruises all over my stomach and legs, and I had no phone, obviously. It was then that I called the police using a friend's phone and told them that I wanted to press charges. A few days later, he messaged me saying that I tried to steal from him, that I took advantage of him just to get some weed. A few hours after that, he texted me saying sorry. A few more hours, he texted asking what had happened to me yesterday. Then a week later, he found out that I had reported him to the police, and he was mad. He said that he couldn't believe that I'd reported him. Then he told me that he would give me 2 new phones or whatever I wanted if I withdrew the report, that he wouldn't contact me anymore if I just did it. He just didn't want any trouble and didn't want to lose his daughter. I didn't answer. Then he sent me another message fabricating the whole story of what happened that night. He kept harassing me for weeks with messages. Some days he was begging us to get back together or to be friends, bribing me. Other days he was accusing me of random stuff, calling me names, etc. And that he had a great lawyer and that he would report me to the police for stuff that I had never actually done. He kept acting like a smart aleck, saying that he would beat me in court. It all became very chaotic in the end. After a few months, there was a trial as well. I couldn't attend physically, so I testified via a phone call. I was questioned about our relationship and the incident that night. He lied and made up stories about me, but no one believed him. As the trial was done, I received all the papers in the mail, and honestly, I was in shock when I read it. You see, he had previously been charged with violence and rape towards his ex. Apparently, there was also an incident where he had forced his ex-girlfriend to do things in front of other men and videotaped her. There were other girls too that had experienced similar things. Stuff like robbery, weapons, fights, violence and torture, you name it. He had been in jail multiple times as well, and I had no idea that I had been dealing with such a dangerous person. In fact, I'm pretty sure that he was a psychopath. He has no understanding of what he has done, and the sick part is that I recently came across a post about him on Facebook. Apparently, he's pretty popular with women lately on Snapchat and Instagram. He posts stuff about his life, whining about being beaten up by random men, being tortured and robbed and all that people follow him with guns allegedly. I've learned that the reason that he keeps being beaten up by people is that they know what he has done. He posted pictures of himself at the hospital to make people feel bad for him, and weirdly enough, they do. He makes women feel sorry for him. He says people lie and make up stories about him, and he gains pity. He then posts all the sweet replies and messages girls send him, saying stuff like he feels so grateful for all of their support. He's extremely good at manipulating people, and I honestly feel so lucky that I got away at the time that I did, and that it didn't escalate any further. I checked his Facebook recently too, and apparently he has a girlfriend now. I just pray that he doesn't hurt her in any way and that she gets out of there quickly, because Lord knows what that man is capable of. From the age of 7 to 12, I had a best friend called Aaron. He was playful, always cheerful, witty, and intelligent. His family, they rented a place from a relative of my brother-in-law. His family consisted of his parents, his sister, and him. We always hung out in the afternoons and on weekends. My cousin Aaron and I would get together, and it's worth noting that neither he nor his sister attended school. We were like the Three Musketeers, I guess you could say, although Aaron was much more mature than us. Not in a bad way, but because he was very intelligent, knew about everything, and had answers for pretty much everything. Everything was normal too, and I have very fond memories of our mischief and games together. I remember that he taught me songs and words in a language that I don't know. He also drew strange pictures, and at his house, there were figures and something like an altar with similar drawings. But here comes the strange part. So, in the 7 years we knew each other, neither he nor his sister nor his parents seemed to age a single day. They remained unchanged. I also remember that once they invited me to dinner, and when he started talking about the moon and its power, his mother and father looked at him with a face as if telling him to be quiet and change the subject. His house was surrounded by a yard and had 2 entrances, the main one and one from the patio leading to the kitchen. At the age of 13, one afternoon, we waited for him to go out and play, but he just never showed up. So, not willing to give up, we went and looked for him. My cousin and I went through the patio entrance and heard him telling his mum that he didn't want to leave, and she said, "You know how it is. We could be discovered, you know that." And they continued talking in a mix of his language and ours. At that point, my cousin whistled and he yelled, "I'm coming." We went to play ball, and I was left wondering what they had been talking about. I waited for the right moment to ask him, which was in the late afternoon after the game, and he told my cousin and me something that we will never forget, because his voice changed and he became very serious. He told us that his family came from a lineage that didn't age normally like us, and that he wasn't really 13. Apparently, too, they traveled everywhere. My cousin jokingly asked, "Well, how old are you, 80? And he replied, 64. I got goosebumps from that, and from there, we each went home. The next day, we went around to see him, but his house was now empty, and there was no trace of him or his family anywhere. In fact, we never saw him in the town again. They just disappeared completely. The question of what really happened, I guess that will always gnaw at me. We all remain with this doubt, and to this day, everyone in the town remembers this kid, so it wasn't just a figment of my imagination or anything. Also, my brother-in-law told my mum that his relative rented out the place privately, but the father's name was Samuel Bassett or Bastide or something like that. I've searched on Facebook, Data's, Family Search, everywhere where I could find a record, and there is no record at all, anywhere, of this family. A little bit of context first. So I'm 27 and male. My parents are out of town for the weekend at a church conference of some kind. They're very religious, but I personally am not. I take care of our animals while they're gone, and I started a new job 3 weeks ago that requires my being there at 7 a.m. This has changed my sleep schedule to where I start getting tired at around 9 to 10 and wake up at around 5:45. My alarm clock is normally set to this too. I do have one cat of my own, and my parents have 2 cats and a dog. Our dog, Black Lab German Shepherd named Daisy, lapdog in a big body, is getting older and doesn't have the best bladder these days. So, I was awoken at around 1:10ish. I didn't look at the time, but it fits the timeline of the night, by Daisy panting at my bedside wanting to go out. I managed to get myself out of bed and downstairs. We have a back room area that leads to the backyard, as do my neighbors. I opened the back door to this area, turned on the light in a bit of a daze, and opened the door to let Daisy out. I came back inside to our kitchen and closed the door behind me. My cat enjoys eating while being pet, so I started petting him. The cat bowl is on a countertop that looks out into the right side portion of the backyard. A little bit of our neighbor's yard too because of the fence, and a clear view of their back room area. We use ours as a storage room for old kitchen stuff and trash cans. My neighbors, they converted theirs into a sort of mini lounge room. I began to get hungry at this point, so I got a bowl of cereal and placed myself next to the cat. Leaning over the bowl while eating, I stared out the window while I waited for Daisy to finish her business. And that's when I saw something. I saw a black figure moving around in the dimly lit, red light room of their back lounge area. At first, I genuinely thought somebody was robbing them. Then I thought that maybe I was dreaming. I looked at the time on the microwave and it was 1:16 in the morning, so I stared at it to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. And it moved really strangely. Like whoever it was wasn't trying to forcibly enter, but spastically sort of flailing and moving back and forth. That's when my neighbor turned on the light to the back room and hobbled out. Her and her husband are older, and honestly, I couldn't believe my eyes. As soon as she turned the light on, whatever it was just gone. I've seen movies where the person sees a ghost, turns the light on and it's gone, but seeing it in real life is very much a different story. She looked around the room and then looked into her backyard. She turned around and walked back inside after, I'm assuming, she saw nothing. But I think she saw something or heard something that made her want to check it out. In any case, I let Daisy back in after she had done her one bark to let me know that she was done. I put the finished cereal bowl in the sink and went upstairs to go back to bed. Before I did though, I went to my notes on my phone to write down times, dates, and what I saw. I'm very tempted to ask them about it too, but some people are very, very freaked out by stuff like this. I told a past coworker about one other experience that I had, and they visibly looked distraught. I just don't really tell anyone about this unless it's brought up naturally in conversation, I guess. She is also not the best mentally and has recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And I don't know, this might just be a little bit too much for them. I just wanted to share this here with someone because I don't really have friends to share this with, and parents think that anything ethereal is demonic. Maybe it is, I mean, who knows, but it could also be their deceased father that passed away 2 years ago, or something else. In any case, eventually I went over to my neighbors to check in and see if they saw what I saw, and she said that apparently they didn't see anything. She said that she went out to turn off the heater in there, but doesn't remember looking around the room and into the backyard. I must have been in a dream state or something because, I don't know, what I saw looked just so real. I must have been imagining things, I guess, but I just cannot shake the feeling that I wasn't. I live with my wife in a home that we recently purchased around 6 months ago. I have never had an experience like this before, and I'm really not sure what I should do, if anything. So last night at around 3:45 a.m., I woke up suddenly, rolled over, and saw a 7-foot-tall dark silhouette standing over my wife's side of the bed. I flinched and jumped out of the bed, took my eyes off the being for probably half a second, and in the time that I had, it had disappeared. And I can assure you that there was nothing there that could have mistaken for what I saw, i.e. a coat rack or anything of the sort. It was dark, no lights were on, and I had just woken up from sleeping. However, my eyes were adjusted to the darkness, and whatever it was seemed far darker than anything else in the room, like a solid black, as if you drew a solid Sharpie figure on a dark grey piece of paper. The silhouette was very tall, had no details on its body or face, no hair, no ears, no impressions for eyes or anything. It looked three-dimensional, as I could make out a radius around the dome of the head and the neck. It had broad shoulders, as opposed to a lot of similar reports I've seen online. It looked slightly hunched over and was staring directly at me. I say this because it looked like it had a small forward tilt to its head. I saw its full body from where I imagine its knees were. Its midsection tapered slightly inward from the broadness of the shoulders, and from the waist down, it looked like the same. No gaps of shadow between where its legs would have been, as if it was wearing a cloak that sort of draped down to its feet. All a deep, solid black color. Like I said too, I looked at it for about 2 seconds before I jumped up. I noticed it immediately when I rolled over, but didn't understand what I was seeing until after a moment or two. I suspect my delayed reaction was due to the fact that I was asleep shortly before and had to get my bearings on what was happening. I have no idea what it was or what to do, and I remained awake for about an hour afterward before eventually I just fell back asleep from exhaustion. I wake up for work at 6 a.m. and go about my business. If anyone has seen this, or if you have any advice for how I should handle this, then really please do message me. I mentioned it to my wife only that I saw something strange last night and that she should tell me if she sees anything odd in the future. I don't want to scare her, but it sure scared the heck out of me. My husband and I moved into this house that we currently live in a little over 4 years ago. We live on Long Island, New York, in a very old colonial house built in 1907. Ever since moving in, we've experienced some very strange things. The first experience still freaks me out to this day. I left work early as I was sick with a cold that day. I went straight upstairs to our bedroom to take a nap, and after lying in bed for a few short minutes, I heard the sound of someone coming up the stairs. Clear as day footsteps on each step. Now, our staircase has 2 sets of stairs with a landing in between, so whoever it was made their way slowly up the first set, paused for a moment, then the second set. Our bedroom door sits at the step of the stairs, and whatever it was, it just stopped right at our door. I rationalized at first as my husband coming home from work, but that didn't make sense as he wouldn't be due to come home for like another hour and a half. And in my heart, I knew that it wasn't him. I genuinely got such a scared feeling that my entire body stiffened up and all of my senses heightened. Later, when my husband did come home, I asked him if he came home early and then maybe went downstairs again, and told him what I heard, but he said no, he just got home. But he didn't quite believe me, I guess. Well, about a month later, he experienced the same thing. He was home from work alone and laid down to take a nap when he heard footsteps coming up the stairs. He then started believing, and it was then that he started believing that we weren't alone in the house. We had our baby, a boy, in 2021, and one night I was up breastfeeding him. I used to go downstairs to our living room so my husband could sleep as he went back to work after paternity leave. I'm sitting on my big comfy armchair snuggling our newborn who fell asleep in my arms when I suddenly hear footsteps upstairs. Clear as day again, footsteps in our upstairs hallway. I freeze and listen carefully, knowing that I didn't hear our bedroom door open, so it couldn't have been my husband. Oddly enough, about 10 minutes later, my husband does get up to use the bathroom, and I call up to him and ask him if he was up before, to which he said that no, he just got up then to go to the bathroom. I was really creeped out. I refused to breastfeed downstairs anymore, and I only did it in our bedroom from then on. The last big thing that happened was my mum, who lives out of state, was coming to visit and babysat for us to give us our first official date night out since having our son. We got home after dinner and my mum looked absolutely horrified. She said that she was sitting on the rocking chair while my son was asleep in her arms when suddenly she heard footsteps outside the bedroom door, and then 3 loud bangs against it, like someone was banging their fists against it angrily. She said that she jumped right up and opened the door to check, but when she did, nobody was there. She then anxiously awaited our arrival back and has been afraid to stay with us ever since then. Since then, too, we've experienced little things here and there, but it seems like the activity has died down. My son is older now and has told us that the walls in his room talk to him, which creeped us out a lot, but we chalked it up to an overactive toddler imagination. I'm honestly glad that nothing has really happened since then, as it sincerely freaks me out, and I really, really don't want my son getting scared either. I also want to add one more thing too that may or may not be related to what we have also experienced. One day, a few months ago, we were eating dinner with my son, and out of nowhere he tells us, "I played with Grandpa yesterday." So we assumed that he meant my dad, as my husband's father unfortunately passed away several years ago. And when I asked him what he meant, because we haven't seen my dad in a while, he said, "No, not that Grandpa, my other grandpa." My husband and I looked at each other and asked him what his grandpa looked like, and he said, "He looks like a girl with long hair and he had wings and flew up in the sky." My husband's dad, he was a musician and had long hair all of his life. And I kid you not, we were so freaked out, but also sort of relieved, I guess. Like maybe this ghost or whatever was his grandpa looking out for us. I'm really not sure, but it is one of the craziest things to happen to me ever, and really, I just want it to stop. Back in 2018 and 2019, I was outside my house with my little brother, keeping him entertained while my family was out. I don't remember exactly what we were doing, but all of a sudden I just had this feeling that we were being watched. I looked past my brother into the wooded area in front of my house. In the ditch right before the wooded area, I see a figure of a head pop out. It had the head of a fox or a cat or something, I guess. Ear pointed up, white fur, black eyes, ears were white with the tips being black. As soon as I locked eyes with it though, it sort of shot down. Originally I was going to look into the ditch, but something was screaming at me not to. About 20 minutes go by and my back is facing the woods and my brother is facing the woods. We got into some conversation when he just stops mid-sentence and looks over me in shock and confusion. I look back and we see a black figure run into the woods. We just stared into the woods, and I then got an idea and told my brother to go inside and grab one of our flashlights. It's one of those really powerful ones that you can adjust the distance with and brightness, enough to even light up a room even when it's daytime, or when it's completely dark it's like you just turn on a light to a room. He goes and grabs it and he hands it to me. When I shined it on the woods, just slowly searching for something, I stopped near the right corner of the woods, and that's when I see that there are just white eyes looking back at us. We were stunned looking at this thing, and then I realized something. Our house is on a hill, you see, and the woods, they are not. So whatever it was looking at us and standing at equal footing with the hill to look at us. And this hill was pretty large. The eyes kept looking at us, then to the side, and then they would sway left to right. We were watching it and sort of clicking off the flashlight to wait for 5 or 10 minutes to see if it would leave, but it wouldn't. We didn't have our phones with us to take a photo or a video. It never even crossed our minds, to be honest. But we stood there until it got dark, which was almost 2 hours, the figure just looking at us the whole time, occasionally moving left or right. My brother eventually ran inside though and said that he had an idea now and grabbed a BB gun, took aim and tried to shoot at it. The eyes just looked down and slowly back up. He took the flashlight and told me to try to scare it off. Again, I aimed and shot where the eyes were and nothing. The eyes moved like it turned around and slowly turned back to us. 30 minutes go by and we still did the same routine. Turn off the light, wait a minute or two, and then turn it back on, and the eyes just still stared at us, swaying like that. Then, my grandfather came home and we tried desperately to show him what we were seeing, and when we did, it was gone. We tried telling him what we saw, and he kept telling us that it was a raccoon. We kept trying to tell him that there's no way that it was that. I mean, it had to be something else with the size of it. He just snapped at us eventually and yelled that it's a raccoon and not to ask or talk about it again. Shortly after telling him about this, though, we moved, out of the blue without warning. Before we officially moved, my grandfather just stared into the woods, shook his head and then looked up. I personally have no idea what I saw that day, but I have a sneaking suspicion that my grandfather knew exactly what we saw, but just never wanted to tell us. Ever since I was a kid, I remember my grandma denouncing horror of any kind. Ghoulish Halloween masks, haunted houses, scary movies. I had attributed this aversion to her background and faith. She's Hispanic and a devout Catholic. She believes that anything horror-related is wrong, evil, you name it. So imagine my shock and curiosity when my grandparents shared a bombshell. Back in 1974, my grandpa convinced my grandma to see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This would be her first and last scary movie. The weekend after the movie, my grandpa, grandma, my then toddler-age mother, and my aunts and uncles decided that they'll go horseback riding for the first time. Since everyone lived in Wisconsin, my family made the journey to a farm about 2 hours away. For the most part, everyone is in high spirits. And I mean, who can say no to a family adventure on a crisp autumn Wisconsin day? Despite the others' excitement, my grandma is worried. Since she doesn't care for horses, she chooses to stay behind as well, on her own with my mother. When my family arrives at the farm, it is 3 o'clock at this point. According to my grandma, she watched everyone get saddled up and then slowly ride off into the tangle of trees. The guide leading my family called out that the ride would last less than 2 hours, mentioning different trails, the need for breaks and all that, things of that nature. My grandma figures everyone will be back by 5 o'clock. She waits with my mother in the car, playing games, reading storybooks, and trying to silence her bubbling anxiety. Needless to say, 5 o'clock comes and goes, and no sign of my family. By this time, my mother has fallen asleep, which leaves my grandma with no way to distract herself from her worries. Finally, though, when 6 o'clock rolls around, she calls to a farmhand from her car window. No way is she leaving the safety of her vehicle, but she demands to know why her family hasn't returned yet, when 5 o'clock has long since passed. By now, darkness has begun bleeding into the Wisconsin sky. The farmhand assures her that everything is okay and that extra paths are taken throughout the ride. He tells her that her family should return very soon. Now, keep in mind that this was all before cell phones were a thing. Also, a week before, she had seen her first scary movie, and it had scared her half to death at this point. My poor grandma feels like she's living out a scene from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She tries to contain her worry and begins a hushed, fearful prayer, until the flash of lightning that is soon followed by ear-splitting thunder occurs. The noise wakes my mother, who starts to cry. My grandma must now not only ponder the frightening question of where her family went, she also has a stressed, howling 2-year-old to deal with as well. It is now reaching 7 o'clock. The storm is growing more ferocious by the second. My grandma has to pee and her bladder feels like it's going to explode. But between the roar of the storm and the images of crazed country maniacs plaguing her mind, she refuses to leave the vehicle. She plans in her head that if they aren't back by 7:30, she's going to leave and find the nearest gas station to phone for help. Again, there's no cell phones during these days. And 7:30 arrives, her family hasn't come out of the woods yet. As she's scrambling around the car for the keys, she realizes my grandpa never gave them to her. The pound of a fist against her window shakes her from her whirlwind of panic. That panic amplifies by 1,000,000 when she notices a sizable, brawny man peering in at her. He's wearing a jacket and the hood covers his head. My grandma says that by now it felt like someone had pushed a button and sent the world into slow motion. Everything crawled by at a snail's pace. "Why don't you and your little one come inside?" the man yells. His words are authoritative though and carry no hint of warmth. He isn't speaking from a place of concern. He's ordering my grandma into the farmhouse. All my grandma can do is shout, "Where is my family?" The man responds gruffly, "We're looking for them." My grandma orders him to call the police. The next words the man said made my grandma literally pee her pants. "We don't need the police," is what he said. As he turns to go back into his house, he says, "You and the baby can come inside whenever you're ready." My grandma starts to sob, wholly convinced that her family has been brutally murdered and that she and her baby will be next. In the chaos of this moment, she hears someone calling her name, but because of the pitch-black darkness and her profound fear, she knows that she must be hearing things. Then she hears her name again, this time even louder. "Dora, help me." It's my grandpa's voice. When she realizes this, she puts my mum in the back seat, grabs the wooden baseball bat my grandpa keeps under his seat, locks the doors, and then exits the car. "Keep calling my name, I can't see you," she cries. After what feels like an eternity, she follows my grandpa's voice to his location. When she gets to him, she realizes that my grandpa needed help because he is guiding my aunt across the high, rain-soaked grass. She had accidentally hurt her ankle as well. They're both drenched from mud and rain and covered in scratches. The rest of my family is nowhere in sight at this point though. Before my grandma can assume the worst, she hears my uncle calling for my grandpa. One by one, everyone shuffles out of the wild woods and through the tall grass. Everyone is soaked in mud and injured in some capacity. Cuts, gashes, limping, unsteady, all are shaken as well. But when they finally make it back to their vehicles, the sounds of running engines and the flood of headlights gets the attention of the man inside the farmhouse. The farmhouse door swings open, and the brawny man comes standing on the porch. With an amused chuckle, he drawls, "Oh, you all made it out of there." My grandpa shouts, "That guy left us out there and never came back." All the man says in response is, "I'll have to talk to him about that. You all can come inside." His freakishly flippant and joking attitude sinks into his words. He knows very well that they aren't going into his house. My grandma begs my grandpa to leave it and get them out of there. And with that, my family tears out of there as fast as humanly possible. Once my family was back home and safe, my grandpa explained what had happened. So during the ride, the guide led them into a deep part of the woods to a creek where the horses stopped for a drink. As the horses rested, the guide told my family that he had to do something and would be back in 20 minutes. My family thought that this was a bit strange, and my grandpa even anxiously joked, "You're coming back, right?" The guide simply gave a low chuckle and took off on his horse. 20 minutes came and went, and the guide didn't return. My family continued to wait as they had no idea where to go. They could see the sky blackening above them, and they would have to make it out of there on their own at this point. As my family rode off, they tried to remember the path back to the farm. They wandered aimlessly, and eventually the rain started to fall. Pulsing lightning and crash of thunder spooked the horses. Everyone but my grandpa got thrown off their horses. When my grandpa climbed off of his horse to help the others, his own horse galloped away as well. And from there, it was a nightmare trying to navigate the woods while wounded and roaming through a thick void of darkness like that. It is something that my grandma has never forgotten, and they often talk about what the intentions of those guys actually were. I guess the only advice I can give you is this: be careful about things like this, because what seems like an innocent day can turn into an absolute nightmare. This story happened just this summer. I'm only now getting around to writing it down as well. So, I would consider myself an outdoorsman. I grew up in the sticks, and I've spent a lot of time wandering in and enjoying the backcountry. I'm older now and have settled down in the suburbs. Wife, 2 boys, a house, a dog, a desk job, the whole suburban shtick. I want opportunities for my kids that come from suburban life, but I also want them to grow up with an appreciation for the outdoors. So when my oldest son was big enough for his first solo father-son camping trip, I was really excited. My wife and youngest son stayed home for this midsummer trip, and it was going to be a great bonding experience for me and my son. Because my son is just 5, I didn't want to do anything too extreme on our first big solo camping trip. We needed a place that wasn't too deep in the Colorado Front Range, but still allowed for dispersed camping. I don't consider camping in RV parks or established campgrounds to be actual camping. I mean, you might as well just be in a motel watching TV. Camping, at most, is a tent, sleeping bag, and a fire for sure. A dispersed camping area called Gordon Gulch, west of Boulder, caught my attention because of this. I'd never been to this area before. There were no facilities, and it was dispersed enough that you couldn't see or hear other campers nearby. My son and I had a blast that day. We set up camp, collected firewood, went for a hike, saw a moose and a bobcat, tried a little fishing as well, and finally, as the sunlight faded, we returned to our campsite to light a fire. We had a very traditional and nutritious camping meal of fire-burned hot dogs and marshmallows. It was a good day, really, and definitely a core memory for both my son and me. The perfect first camping experience for a preschooler, really. Or so I thought. So, after all that fun, my son and I were pretty exhausted. It was time for bed, and the sound of an evening summer breeze through the pines is better than any commercial sleep aid. I don't even remember drifting off. It was a hard, dreamless sleep that only physical exertion can really bring on. One thing about my son is that he inherited many things from me: hair color, eye shape, disposition, and my usual wide feet, but one peculiar thing he got from his mother was sleep talking. It's not unusual to hear him having full conversations in his sleep. It gets more pronounced when he's overly tired. But I was catapulted out of the void of sleep. Not sure what aroused me, but I sat up collecting myself. The world seemed to be at peace. It was quiet, just me and the breeze through the treetops. I couldn't figure out what actually woke me so suddenly like that. But the sound of my son laughing in his sleep cut through my groggy confusion. It was a deep belly laugh. Must be a fun dream, I thought hazily. I gently rocked him, and that was enough to quieten him down. That must have been what startled me, I determined. As I sort of repositioned to fall back to sleep, my son burst out laughing. I sighed and closed my eyes. He'll quieten down soon enough, I thought. He laughed again, but this time his laugh was echoed by something outside of our tent. I held my breath and listened, unsure of what I just heard. It wasn't an echo, though. There was something out there, and it was laughing in unison with my son. My grogginess vanished as the adrenaline began to pump. It couldn't be real. It had to be my imagination, surely. I sat up in my sleeping bag listening to the night. Hearing nothing after a minute, my muscles relaxed. I started to settle back down. I must have been hearing things. I was tired after all. Checking the time, I saw that it was 4 a.m. The sun would be up in a couple of hours. My son laughed again, and again it was answered with laughter outside. I was now absolutely certain that that was not an echo. As I tried to make sense of what was happening, the voice outside called my son's name, and at that, my blood ran cold. That voice, it was so familiar. Then it clicked in my brain. It was the voice of my younger son. That wasn't at all possible, though. He was safe at home with my wife, miles and miles away. I could hear twigs crunching beyond our thin nylon tent walls. It was impossible to tell the distance from us, but there was something out there, circling us. Unprompted this time, it called out my son's name in that little toddler voice. My 5-year-old, still fast asleep, called out to his brother, asking him to play. The thing outside the tent laughed in reply, and urged my son to come outside. That thing with my little son's voice sounded cold though, sort of hollow, dead. The floodgates of my adrenaline burst open at this. Cold sweat formed on my face. I was frightened out of my mind, but my primal caveman brain roared to life all of a sudden. I was in Papa Bear mode, and nothing was going to take or hurt my son. I was putting a stop to this, and whatever it was that was out there, I didn't care. You don't mess with my kids. Say what you will as well, but when you're camping miles from anything, it's not worth the risk of being unarmed. Wild animals, wild people, you have to be prepared. I almost always take a firearm with me when I'm camping. Pepper spray and bear bells are great, but nothing gets attention from a conscious threat faster than the sound of chambering around. I spoke loudly into the night that I had a gun and was coming out. I hoped that the fear in my voice was masked by my aggressiveness. The only reply was the breeze through the treetops. My son was still asleep, thankfully. Kid's a hard sleeper, another trait from his mum. My wife and I joked that he could sleep through a tornado, in fact. Stepping out into the cool summer night, though, a gun in one hand and a flashlight in the other, I surveyed the campsite. The fire was now down to embers. Our fishing gear was leaning against the pickup. The firewood was still neatly stacked, and really, nothing seemed out of place. Not wanting to stray far from the tent or my sleeping son, I sat down inside the entrance. I waited in the dark with the flashlight off, and it was then that, not far into the trees, I heard a branch break. Then another snapped, and this time it was closer. I stood up and flashed my light in the direction of the sound, but nothing was there. The voice then called out, this time from behind, and this time seemingly focused towards me. "Daddy, Daddy," it said. It was my youngest son's voice again, crying out for me from the dark forest. I threw the light beam in that direction. A pair of shimmering green eyes were illuminated by my flashlight all of a sudden. They were only 2 or so feet above the ground, though, the same height as a toddler. I took a small step forward. I wanted to see more. I needed to see more. The eyes, unblinking, remained in place, Getting closer, though, didn't seem to help reveal this thing. In fact, it was weird. It seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, almost devouring it. I couldn't make out its size, shape, or color. It seemed to swallow up the light all around it, save for its two shimmering green eyes, obviously. But that thing, whatever it was, laughed in its hollow toddler's voice, this time with malice and cruelty in it. The eyes never looked away from me, never blinking, focused only on me, almost like a predator before the pounce. Not wanting to give up any ground to a predator, I stepped forward again. It didn't move. Not knowing what to do, I screamed as loud as I could. I waved my arms, trying futilely to shoo it away. The eyes shimmered, and as I stared back, the eyes shifted from green to amber. I watched as they began to rise up into the air, and it was now apparent to me that this thing, whatever it was, had been crouching and was now standing up. I could only watch in silent terror as the eyes finally stopped rising, nearly 10 feet off the ground at this point. The night air erupted with a deep growl. I could feel the vibrations in my guts. I couldn't see a mouth, but I could hear teeth sort of snapping and gnashing. My son in the tent behind me began to scream at this point. That was the only time the eyes lost focus on me and shifted towards the screams of my kid. My only reaction was to fire my gun into the air. The eyes immediately vanished. My ears were ringing, but I could hear the growls turn to shrieks, followed by a cacophony of crashing branches and undergrowth. I stood there until I couldn't hear the shrieking anymore. It trailed off deep into the trees. I was left with only the sound of the breeze in the treetops and the quiet sobbing of my kid. Twilight was beginning to illuminate the forest. Shaking and somewhat exhausted now, I sat down in the dirt in front of the tent and I tried to collect myself. "Daddy? Daddy, where are you?" my 5-year-old shouted. That got me out of my daze. I picked myself up and went into the tent to retrieve him. Putting him in the truck, I locked the doors and I wasted little time breaking down camp. We were out of that camp and back on the road by the time the sun broke over the horizon. Now, I have no idea what is in those woods. I do plan to camp in that area again, albeit without my family, and definitely with some friends this time, because I really want to find out more about this thing. Thankfully, my son doesn't seem fazed by anything that happened that night. He thinks that I was chasing a bear away from camp, and who knows, maybe he's right. I hope he is anyway. My son can't wait to go on another camping trip, but truthfully, I'm thinking that the next family camping trip might actually be at an RV park, or maybe even a motel. After all, that is family camping, right? So I went out to one of those sort of abusive wilderness programs for troubled teens when you're backpacking through the Utah desert. And while out there, we stayed one night near some Native American ruins. Before we settled into our camp, we went to go to look at them and were told, like we always were around sites like this, not to touch anything, only to look, and definitely do not take anything. Majority of us did just that. We looked around a bit while being respectful for maybe 15 minutes, and then went back to our camp to finish doing what we needed to do. We were sleeping in an A-line shelter that night, so we were all in a straight line side by side. Because it was an A-line shelter, both ends were just open to the darkness, and because we had one male staff and one female staff, both adults had to be on one end with the female separating the rest of us from the male, consequently leaving the kids on the other end completely exposed. But anyways, the rest of the evening was pretty uneventful and we went to sleep like normal. In the middle of the night, I got woken up by the kid to my left shaking me awake, telling me that they keep hearing something hitting our shelter. I'd been out there for a decent amount of time at that point, and immediately told her that it was probably just an animal or the wind making a branch hit it or something, and to just ignore it and go back to sleep. She was super insistent though that it couldn't be any of those things, and begged me to stay up for a few minutes to hear what she was talking about. So I agreed under the condition that she would go back to sleep and leave me alone if I didn't hear anything in 5 minutes. I don't even think it was a full minute after I said that before something hit against the side of our tent, right at my feet very hard. It sounded like someone open palm slapped the side of our tent, in fact, hard enough that we saw the tarp sort of bow in under the pressure. We sat in complete silence listening to whatever it was circling our shelter and periodically slapping it in the different places, first by my feet, then my staff's feet, then their heads, then my head, before moving to slap above the heads of the kids, who apparently took the pottery from that place, before circling to slap at their feet. It just kept going around, and we started trying to figure out what to do. I told her to wake up the staff, and that was when she told me that she tried waking them up first before she woke me up, and that they had told her to just go back to sleep and ignore it. We decided that the best thing to do was to wake up the girl to my right and tell her what was going on. She stayed awake and heard the slapping that we were hearing, and then tried waking up the staff, telling them that we weren't joking and that there could be someone in our camp. They didn't take her seriously either, telling us to stop making things up and to let them sleep. At that response, the girl to my right just said to heck with it, that if we were going to be killed by a madman, she'd rather it happen in her sleep anyway. Real of her, to be honest. And she rolled over and did just that. I didn't know what else to do, so I told the kid who woke me up that the girl to my right was probably onto something and that we should just try to get some sleep. While I was telling her this, her eyes sort of shifted to where she was looking past me over my shoulder, and she got this look that I'll never forget before saying, "My name, there's someone standing at the end of our tent." I nearly wet myself in that moment. I really did not want to look, but I knew I had to, so I turned around and saw the silhouette of a man standing just on the other side of the tree that the top line to our shelter was tied to. I remember the first kid asking me, "What do we do?" And the only thing that I could think of was to wake up everyone to my right and pull them all as tight as we could inside of our shelter. And so that's what we did. We all stayed up, packed together like sardines, listening to this thing circle our shelter for hours, until we each finally fell asleep. It wasn't until the next morning that we found out that a couple of kids that had lagged behind at the ruins the day before took pieces of pottery and hid them in their sleeping bags. We immediately made them return them and apologize, and we never had anything like that happen again after that. I'll be honest though, I don't know if it scares me more to think that it was paranormal, or that there was actually a man in our camp that deep in a national park in the winter like that, in the dead of night. When I was a kid, probably around 12 to 13, my mum moved out to this farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. We couldn't get internet middle of nowhere. It was a property with 13 acres, a dilapidated barn and horse corral that had overgrown weeds, and of course the main farmhouse. At night, there were no lights other than the one in the front yard to show that our electricity was working. My room had a window that faced the horse corral. Now one night, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was a full moon and I looked out of my window, and beside one of the fence posts of the corral, there was a girl standing there. She was wearing a nightgown and rubber boots. She was facing my window. From there, things seemed to get worse as well. The TV that we had in our basement would turn on and off randomly. My mum would hear an old radio playing in the middle of the night. My stepmom would go out to the barn to smoke, and one time she was in there, she heard a girl say her name. She thought that it was me, but at that time I was at my dad's house in the city. When I would wake up in the middle of the night to pee or to get some water or whatever, I would feel like someone was watching me. If I looked into our living room, it felt like someone was watching me through the window. One day, my stepmom and I were walking down the hallway, and we both saw a nightgown go down into the bathroom. When we went to go and check, no one was in there. This all came to a head though one night when I woke up randomly again in the middle of the night. I used to keep my room door open and it would look out to the hallway of our house. I was laying in bed, unable to fall back asleep, when, as clear as day, I heard a girl whisper my name. At first, I thought that it was a noise that my sheets made when I moved. I tried recreating the noise, but it didn't work. Then I looked out into the hallway, and standing in my doorway was a dark figure of a girl wearing a nightgown. I stared at it, unable to move. I turned on my bedside lamp, and when I did, nobody was there. It honestly took everything in my body to run down the hallway into my mum's room where I slept for the night, but eventually I got there. For unrelated reasons, we moved out of the house shortly after that, which, to be honest, at that point, I was very grateful for. My family moved around a lot when I was a child, mainly due to my dad's job. We moved 4 to 5 times before I was 6 years old. My mum wanted some stability for the family, which at this point comprised of her, my dad, myself, and my younger brother. So in 1994, my old man went and bought an old derelict farm that was situated in a rural area in the southwest of the UK, a mile from the nearest village and a quarter mile from our neighbours. He purchased it at a property auction, and we had no prior viewing, just the pictures on display at the auction house. This place was really old and comprised of a few large fields and 2 interconnected yards filled with outbuildings and a derelict house. It had been a working farm in various forms for 500 years or so, and the house itself was 250 years old. We spent a year living elsewhere whilst the renovations took place, but would often go there at weekends to run around and play. The first day we entered the dusty, half-collapsed 2-story house, we realized that the previous occupants had left loads of their stuff behind. The house had been vacated 25, maybe 30 years prior. Everything was dusty, moldy, and falling to pieces. Some of the highlights, though, were dressing tables filled with old clothes and makeup. A wall in one room was plastered with rosettes won in a queen competitions, and hanging from the banister at the top of the stairs were a row of small string nooses covered in fur. It's a barbaric but not uncommon way for farm folk to get rid of unwanted kittens, apparently. Now, this wasn't paranormal in any way, but man, it was an unnerving thing to see in an already creepy-looking house. It would take far too long to list everything that happened, so I'll just try to list some highlights below before ending with what I consider to be the strongest occurrence that happened there. So, we had loud bangs, loud enough to make you think that someone had tipped over a wardrobe or something. Footsteps running up and down the long wooden hallway were common. Cold spots and breezy points throughout the house that changed from day to day. One night my grandparents were house-sitting, and before they went to bed, they did a quick look check. One room at the end of the house was filled with thick mist. It was a clear night. All doors and windows were shut, and the mist was exclusive to that room. They just noped it out of there and stayed at their own place that night. But the next day, everything was back to normal. After living there for 6 months, my mum actually called the village priest in to bless the place. We weren't a religious family by any means, but she was really at a loss about how to cope with everything. Priest arrived and then proceeded to sprinkle holy water in every room of the house. Once that was done, Mum walked out to his car, and as soon as they got out of the house, he turned to her and said, "There's an incredibly dark presence in this house, and I'm never setting foot here again. I don't know what to suggest. I'm really sorry, but good luck." And then he got into his car and just sped off. He had apparently been fairly neutral during the blessings, but as soon as he got out of that house, he went pale, and his whole demeanor changed instantly. Things got a lot more chill after a medium came around and told Mum to kind of embrace it, which she did. But there was always this nagging feeling that we were just never alone there. It didn't feel malevolent, but it felt sort of observational and sometimes sad in a sort of wistful way. Still very strange, but anyway, the weirdest thing that happened actually occurred during the renovation phase. Dad and his work crew had removed all of the old possessions from the house and made a huge bonfire in the yard. They burned it over the course of a few days until it was just a steaming pile of ash. The following weekend, my mum took me and my bro over for a picnic and run around. We were feral little things and needed it. At one point, Mum sat in the chair not far from the bonfire and noticed an envelope on the big mound of ash. And despite being in the center of this pile, the envelope had inexplicably not burned up. Mum could tell that there was something heavier than paper in the envelope, and when she opened it up, an amethyst crystal dropped out along with a letter. The date on the letter was sometime in the early 60s and was written by the childhood sweetheart of a girl who had lived at the house with her parents. It was a letter of condolence to the parents, because it turns out the girl had sadly committed suicide in her room when she was around the age of 18. Her ex-boyfriend had heard about it and sent their parents a really sweet letter expressing his love, grief, and condolences. He also sent the amethyst crystal, as that was apparently the girl's favorite stone. My bedroom had been the girl's room, apparently. This was evident from the contents when we first got there. My wardrobe was in the corner by the window looking out over the farm. I could never linger there for too long because that part of the room just felt really unpleasant and sort of tense, I guess. I've since wondered if that's the spot where the girl took her life or not. And while the story of the letter isn't very paranormal, the fact that the letter survived the bonfire is just kind of crazy to me. And obviously the contents and all is a bit weird too. So, yeah, we lived there for 6 years or so and then moved again after my parents split up. The house has changed hands at least twice in the last 20 years. I live about 2 hours from this place nowadays, and my girlfriend and I are really tempted to go and visit and see how it's going. And I mean, I'm sure the owners would just love to be regaled with odd anecdotes about the property, right? Just to clarify too, aside from the weird feelings and the random bangs and noises, my brother and I were largely unaware of things that happened there. We were only told later in life, thank the Lord, because honestly, if I had known that at that time, I would have been an absolute mess. So, for starters, I live near the Appalachian Mountains, which honestly makes this probably more disturbing. I'm a pretty avid runner. I've been quitting a lot of bad habits lately, and exercise just does the trick for me. I have a greenway behind my house that I go on run or bike rides on. It's very beautiful, and during the day plenty of people are there as well. Well, about a week ago I ran through the greenway to stop by a friend's house and grab something. By the time I got back onto the greenway, the sun was already starting to set and the path was getting dark. As I was walking back through the path, I had my flashlight on and kept looking around me. I felt paranoid being alone in the dark, but as I was walking, I distinctly remember hearing my grandma's voice call my name into the tree line. It sounded so real and normal that I turned around instantly, only to immediately go cold, realizing that my grandma was dead. This freaked me out, but I tried my best to somewhat convince myself that I was just hallucinating because I was paranoid. Only about a minute later, I turned around behind me with my flashlight out of fear, and that was when I saw it. It looked like a grey blob, pretty much just like a human sprinting at you full speed in the pitch black. I screamed, and I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. When I got back home, I tried to laugh it off as just me seeing stuff and just being a little scaredy cat. But about a week later, and I still could not stop thinking about it. It sounded so real. I mean, I heard her voice clear as day, and the person chasing me looked so real as well. I've heard all of those stories about skinwalkers, and while I doubt their existence, my experience was so similar to that of skinwalker encounters that I'm seriously beginning to question myself. What do you guys think? Is it possible my brain was just hallucinating out of fear and anxiety, or is there something more to this? I'm from the UK, and way back in 2016, when the whole killer clown epidemic was huge, I was walking through the woods at around 10 PM alone in order to get to a party or a gathering that was happening in a secluded part of the forest. It was almost pitch black, and I could barely see in front of me besides the flash of my phone, and everything seemed normal as I was walking to the party. I got to a long stretch of woods with no defined path, but it was the quickest way to the party, so I took it. As I got around, maybe midway through, I heard something to my left. I turned and saw a shadowy figure sat on a fallen log. I was understandably unnerved, but I couldn't make out if it was just shadows from the moonlight or if it was an actual person. I made the mistake of shining my phone light directly at it, and I was instantly terrified. Sat there, alone in the middle of the woods in complete darkness, was a largish man, dressed as a clown, with full face paint and sporting the creepiest smile imaginable. I tried to call 5 different people as I was passing him, and then I heard him get up behind me. I instantly started sprinting towards the end of the long stretch onto a path which had a barbed wire fence down the side of it. During the sprint, I was pretending to be on the phone with one of my friends, and I could hear him running after me, but there was no chance in heck that I would be turning around to see if I was right. When I got to the path, I jumped over the fence as fast as I could and sliced my hands open as I did so. I turned around and kept running backwards as I saw the clown stood behind the fence just staring at me and smiling. I didn't stop running until I got to the party, and I was scared for a very long time after this too. You have to bear in mind that there were so many rumors of people being killed by people dressed as clowns at that time, and while I will never know if the man had evil intentions or was just trying to scare me, it was still extremely strange and scary to live through. So first, a bit of context. My cousin was tragically murdered not too long ago, and in the days leading up to this horrific event, his nieces and nephews had some inexplicable experiences. One of his nieces, visibly upset, was found crying and clutching a photograph of him, telling her mum how much she missed him on the very day that he was murdered. It was as though she knew something terrible was about to happen. Another niece had a chilling encounter as well. The night of his murder, she claims to have seen a shadow dart across her room. She described it as a swift, unexplainable presence that sent shivers down her spine. But perhaps the most puzzling incident involved one of our nephews. Out of the blue, he started yelling, "No, I don't want anyone from my family to die," repeatedly, without any apparent trigger or context. It was as if he was sensing something that we couldn't. We couldn't help but wonder if these strange occurrences were somehow connected to my cousin's murder. It almost felt as though he was saying a final goodbye to the newest generation of her family, visiting each of them before departing this world in a really tragic way. I'm wondering though, has anyone else experienced or heard of similar bizarre events surrounding the murder of a loved one? It's as if the boundaries between this world and the next are thinner than we might think, and these unexplained phenomena really only add to the mystery. So this happened years ago when I was a dumb teen girl who loved walking the city alone after dark. This took place in Eastern Europe, for context in a city with a tramway system. So on this one night, I sat in a tram station waiting to catch the last tram home. 3 trams stopped at this station, 2 of which went where I was going. It was around 10 p.m. and as I sat there waiting, lost in thought, I barely registered a man quietly walking up and standing by the shelter. I didn't think anything of it, just somebody else waiting for the tram like me, until I started feeling weird. The streets were quiet and dark and there was no one else in sight, just me and this guy, and I started wondering why he chose to stand this close to me when he had so much space to avoid dealing with people at all. I couldn't comprehend anyone wanting to socialize this late at night, given that I was not very social myself. So I sort of glanced at him, trying not to overthink it. He was a bald-headed guy, beady-eyed, giant, tall and built like a bear, big belly and big arms and legs. I was 5'2" and scrawny, but that wasn't what scared me. It was the fact that he was staring right at me when I looked at him, unblinking and expressionless, not even attempting to look away or act embarrassed. No, this guy wanted me to feel uncomfortable. I instantly felt weak and shaky, cold shivers down my spine. This was not normal. I realized quickly that I was not in a good situation. I couldn't miss the last tram, or walking home was out of the question, and my phone was almost dead too. I was a shy kid and I didn't have what it takes to scare this guy away. I knew that, but I had to try at least. I only managed to utter a small hi, trying my best to startle him out of whatever he was thinking, but my attempts failed in the face of his silent, threatening aura. He kept staring, no sign of intent to reply. He was enjoying this. Feeling the panic rising inside of me, I told myself to stay calm and to think rationally. I mean, maybe he didn't hear me. Minutes passed, his stare continued to burn on my skin, and there was still no tram in sight. Ignoring him didn't seem to work either, so I mustered the courage to speak once again, this time louder. "What do you want? Stop staring." No answer. He definitely heard me this time. I felt myself start to get angry. I didn't want to let this guy get to me anymore. I didn't want to continue to give him the satisfaction of watching me squirm nervously and pretend that his behavior didn't bother me. I took a deep breath and forced myself to start thinking. I knew what I can't do. I mean, I couldn't fight him off if he makes a move, and there's nothing I can say or do that will get him to stop. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I knew that they weren't good. If I tried to walk away, he would probably follow. I could run, but he would most likely catch up to me before I can tire him out, since his legs were much longer than mine. If I managed to somehow lose him, walking home through dark alleys past the junkies and gypsies that were always prowling about anyway, could land me in an even worse situation. I could pretend to call someone, but he might feel compelled to act much stronger and sooner if he felt threatened. So what can I do? The only thing that I could realistically be able to do was to try and outsmart him somehow. So I started developing a few plans. Depending on which tram showed up, trying to confirm whether he was just amusing himself and actually waiting for a tram too, or popped over for other more suspicious reasons, and whether I get any kind of help. I couldn't let him see where I lived, so if he followed me, I'd have to be prepared to employ whatever strategy available. And for that, I needed to stay rational and aware of my surroundings. While I was still thinking though, the first tram showed up. It was one that I could have taken home, but this one pulled into the depot right in my neighborhood, forcing me to lead him to my home. I hoped that he would board it and just leave me be, but of course he didn't. He kept watching me carefully instead. I let the tram go, desperately hoping that it wasn't the last one to head home. He continued to watch, and I sensed that he was quite happy with how things were going. I put up with it for another 15 minutes, trying to focus on another plan of action. I could now pretend that I needed the other tram, the one going to a different area of the city, and just ride to the next station, getting off as soon as possible, so I don't end up too far and miss the tram that I need. This tram showed up next, so with my heart in my throat, I boarded it and sat down by the door. He got on it too, but sat himself at the back, pretty far from where I was. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking that this might still go well. When the tram reached the next station, I got up and out, not looking back and hoping that it was all over. But when I stepped onto the pavement and watched the tram drive away, I couldn't see him in it. I turned my head slowly and was terrified to see him walking towards me, looking slightly ticked off at this point. He stopped just a few steps away and resumed staring, this time with a clear hint of malice, still in silence. My vision blurred as I fought back tears of despair. He was not going to let me go at this point. The helplessness that I felt was unbearable, but I couldn't cry. I couldn't give up. I had to find a way. I had to get home tonight. The prospect of what might happen to me any time now if I didn't was becoming very real. My head was full of unanswered questions, regrets, and horrible scenarios. I wanted so badly to not have to think anymore, to not have to fight back the tears and stay composed, but I knew that this would be his cue to enact whatever messed up plan that he had in mind, and I could not let that happen. Then I saw the final tram approach, the only one that I could take now, and I got on as quickly as my trembling legs would allow me to. When I was in, bright lights enveloping me, my mind snapped out of this nightmarish spiral of fear and allowed me a moment of clarity. I had 3 stops to figure this out. I sat down at the front and looked at the driver. He was a frail old guy, blissfully unaware of my distress. Getting the driver's attention was pretty much a no-go as well. We passed one stop. There was no one else waiting to climb aboard. I turned around fully expecting to see that the psycho had followed me again, but I did not expect him to be sitting right behind me. He was not taking any chances now. He was making sure that I won't try anything like last time. I shot him a hateful glare and allowed my anger to overcome my fear. I stood up and purposefully walked over to another seat in the middle of the tram car. I wanted to make it clear that I will not put up with this any longer. He got up too and slowly walked up to a spot 2 seats behind and diagonally from me, then sat down with the tiniest arrogant grin on his face. Already expecting it, I shot up and stood by the middle door instead, determined to keep him on his toes. If I stood right by the door, he won't have any idea which station that I planned to get off at. He remained where he was this time, convinced that I was bluffing. After all, this was really the last tram, and there was nothing else that I could possibly do to escape now. He must have reckoned this, so my defiance was just a funny act to him. This, though, was my chance. I had to take the risk, and it had to work. There were 3 doors on the tram, and they all opened and closed at the same time, and stayed open for around 5 seconds before closing again, if no buttons were pressed or people detected on the threshold. The next stop, the only one left before mine, came into view. The tram slowed to a stop, the doors opened, and I made my move. 5 long seconds passed, the doors started to close. I bolted out and ran for it, reaching the back door as fast as I could, and slamming the button to open it again. My whole body tensed with adrenaline. I waited a long, painful second, then jumped back in, keeping my head low, holding my breath and crouching behind the nearest seat. I shut my eyes tightly and exhaled slowly while thanking the gods that I didn't believe in for the button working, and wishing with all my might for him to have not seen me before I got back in. As I was waiting to hear his footsteps approaching, I pictured him frantically looking for me. Was he still on the tram, face screwed up in anger, head turning like a fat, ugly meerkat? Or was he catching his breath on the pavement of the last station, mad eyes searching the darkness for me? As the tram continued its loud journey, banging and clanging in sync with my heartbeat, I dared smile to myself, imagining his face when he realized that he had messed up. Hand on my chest, I did my best to stealthily look around the corner, and found no one looking back. I stood up in excitement and threw myself at the foggy back window. And there he was, standing alone and victimless on that slowly fading out of sight station, watching me leave him and his vile plans behind. Giving someone the middle finger never felt so good. I made it home and told no one my story, for fear that I'd be admonished for my naivety, but I was safe, and I was proud of myself, and most importantly, I learned my lesson. So my parents opened up a haunted house in my dad's shop. I know, a bit weird. And we had a few actors. Names were obviously... I'll change the names so as to hide the identities, but the actors were me, my dad, my mum, my sister, Bear, Ghostface, Cheerleader, Alien, Prisoner, Doll, and Skeleton. I know it's a lot, but let me explain how the setup was. So, the shop has a store in the front, a gym in the middle, storage in the back. Dad would lead the patron into the storefront and ring the bell to let us know to get ready. Then the patron would pass Bear and Ghostface. Then they would get jump scared by Cheerleader, me and the prisoner, and then pass through the rest. Alien would follow them all the way through as well. Simple. So, when we were near the end of our time, Dad let in a guy, like normal, and I don't want to profile him, but he seemed to be of Arabic descent, or perhaps Muslim, because he seemed to be wearing his clothes like, the clothes that they wear or whatever. But this guy shall be known as the creepy guy. I think now I should mention most of us are minors as well. Sister, Bear, Ghostface, and Skeleton are middle schoolers, and Cheerleader, Alien, and I are high schoolers. Anyway, creepy guy touched Bear's shoulder, and also pulled a knife on Bear and Ghostface. After he passed them, he didn't notice Cheerleader, but grabbed Alien and scratched his arm. After that, he stared at Prisoner and ignored him. He then started speaking in a different language. It sounded like chanting, but I don't know, towards Skeleton, Doll, and my sister, but Mum then ran him off. We were on edge for the rest of the night, and it was a really weird experience. I don't know what he actually said when he was speaking, and if he was threatening us or what, but the whole thing was very strange and, quite honestly, downright scary. Back when I lived in the rural Midwest, about 10 years ago, I lived in a house right off of the highway. My house was right between one town and another, almost right on the county line. So our house had a big circle driveway. If you drove in the driveway, you would be going straight towards our barn. If you curved right, you could pull into our garage. If you went past the garage, you could circle around in front of the house and pull back out where you started. Our house had two large double doors in front, which we rarely used. We always used the door that was inside the garage. And one night, it was very late and my doorbell rang. My husband and my 3-year-old daughter and I were all asleep. It woke me up and I thought maybe I was dreaming at first, but it rang again. I woke my husband up. He thought that I was hearing things until it rang again. It was very dark outside, but we have a dusk to dawn light, so most of the driveway is pretty well lit up. Unfortunately, you can't really see the front doors unless you open the door and look out. You can open just one at a time, or you can open them both by using two latch-like things that are in the top of the bottom of one of the doors. But anyway, my husband gets up and I follow him. He decides that he's going to open the door. I want to call the cops, but because we live on the county line, we know it's going to be a while before they can get there. So in the end, he opens the door to a girl, maybe early 20s. She looks normal, except for the fact that she's standing at my door in the middle of the night. I looked past her and her car is pulled into my driveway just off of the road, not up to the house, not around the circle. She says that she needs to use the phone. She says that her car battery died or something. She's not sure, but she can't get it to start. I told my husband, no way. This is how horror movies start, and we offered to call the cops, which would be the county sheriff. She asks over and over, but I'm not letting her in. We tell her that we will call, and she kind of stomps off. We watch her walk back to the car, maybe 50 feet away. I'm a bad judge of distance, so sorry. But I can see her car and I can see her. call the cops. They say that they'll be there as soon as they can. About 15 minutes, they don't sound very concerned, and at this point, I'm not really either, I guess. I mean, it's just a girl, and she's apparently broken down. She probably just does have a dead battery after all. But then she opens the trunk. No lights come on, and she rummages around in the trunk. Then the driver's side door opens, and out steps a guy. Then the back passenger door opens, out steps one more guy. They all rummage around the trunk, no lights on. I can't hear anything, I can't hear them talking, and I can't tell what they're doing. They all get back in the car eventually. And at this point, maybe 5 minutes have gone by. I am silently praying that the sheriff puts his foot on the gas and gets here quickly, but I know it's going to be another 10 minutes or so at least. And they just sit there, in the car, lights off, not moving. I can't see them when they're in the car, but I know that they're in there. I also know that they didn't get out of the car and walk past the house because they would have had to have walked right under the dusk to dawn light. I would have seen them, in other words. I think that I see the driver's light, a smoke or whatever, and that part I'm not sure about, but then I see something or someone walking towards the car from the right, coming from the direction of the barn. It's a man. I have no idea who this man is. We don't have a neighbor for at least a mile, and he's coming from the back of my property, which ends in a creek. He walks under the dusk to dawn light, straight to the car. He doesn't look at the house, he just walks to the car and gets in the back. Then the car starts up, and they slowly back out of my driveway and head north. The cops arrive about 10 minutes later, and at this point I am freaking out. They search around but can't find anything. They ask us if we got a license plate, but they were parked too far away to see, and they tell us to call if they come back. Sure, buddy, thanks. But my husband goes and he gets his shotgun from the shop on our property, and we just try to go back to sleep. They never do come back, and I don't know who those people were, and I don't know what they wanted, but they were definitely up to something, and I know that whatever it was not good. It all started about a month ago when a man started banging on my door at 6 at night, yelling for Mike to come out, that he needs to see him and get cigarettes. I told him that he had the wrong house and to leave. There has never been a Mike in this house. He got even more aggressive though, calling me a liar and how he was going to come in and beat the skinny living whatever out of me, and I tried to call the non-emergency police line because I've never called 911 before and they didn't even pick up. Looking back, it was stupid, but it was instinct, but after some more yelling, eventually he leaves. I called my father, who was across town, to come home and what was going on, and he showed up. He called 911 to file a report. The guy came back and started screaming at him though. Cops were called again, showed up half an hour after the call and couldn't find him and told me to defend myself if it came to it. I ended up staying with a friend for the night because I didn't think I would feel safe at home. I can be a strong person, but I just don't think that I can do much against a drugged out man like that. What made the situation even scarier to me though is that as I was going through my driveway camera photos, it shows him walking up to my house hours before, and I didn't even have any idea about this. I have really bad anxiety, so the next few days were filled with paranoia and stress, but I managed to finally calm down and convince myself that that was the end of it. Come that weekend, my father went on a trip with his girlfriend, so I was left alone for a couple of days. I just put on a scary movie when I heard screaming again and a loud bang. I pull up my camera and see that he's back, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk and has thrown over our trash can. Again, this guy's screaming for Mike, and I call 911 and they show up within minutes this time and are able to stop him down the street. They tell me that there's really nothing that they can do since he hasn't committed a crime yet, but if he comes back to call them again, and then they'll have more reason to hold him. Things were quiet for a few weeks too. and so I again believed that that was the end of it, until today. This morning my father and I got into an argument, so I wanted to take a walk to clear my mind. I went across the street to a park and sat by a tree watching cars pass every now and then, and it was beautiful morning weather. I noticed a truck drive down the left side of the park and turned to the street my back is facing. He waved as he passed, so I did too, thinking that it was just a man going to work. I wanted to show that I was okay, thinking that that might have been what he was asking about. He then pulls off into the right side of the park, stops, makes a U-turn to come back. Red flags instantly go off in my head, so I get up to start walking home. I look back and see that he's turned off his headlights and is trailing me. I get to the front of my house and he slows. I get a better look at his face this time, and it looks like the man that had been harassing me. From the physical characteristics to his red baseball cap, he just glared at me like I took everything in his life away from him. I get to the door and try to barge in, but my father put the chain on in anger of me walking out, so I had to yell to him that I was being followed and to open the door. He opens it, and by then the truck was gone and it was down the street. Now, I'm terrified to leave my home. I don't have a car to get anywhere quickly. I have to bike, but even now I'm scared to do that. I don't know who that man is or what his deal is or what his intentions are, but I live in paranoia just waiting to find out. So I live in Virginia in a pretty rural area. My house is a townhome in a neighborhood right next to a middle school. I've lived in this house for over 10 years now and frequently went on walks during the daytime all around the neighborhood itself, plus the surrounding buildings and the woods, but I've never gone on a walk at night here. After starting college, I got very accustomed to taking walks around my campus at night when the weather was nice. So now that I'm home for winter break and Virginia is in one of its weirdly warm winter weeks, I decided that I may as well go on a walk at night here, since it's a safe area and night walks are almost daily routines for me now. So I leave my home at around midnight, not pretty late. I walk over to the middle school and I sit down on the track. The track is a concrete oval going around the soccer field. I'm just sitting there relaxing, listening to music with one earbud in. I also had a lit candle on the ground in front of me, which sounds kind of weird of me to have, now that I mention it, I know, but lighting candles while I sit and chill somewhere outside is just a habit I developed from having a ton of candles and being unable to light them in my room at college. Anyway, it was around this point that I hear what sounded like a cough, so I instantly stop my music and start looking around. I don't see anything, but I'm an extremely paranoid person, so I'm still very on edge, even though everything seems fine. I just sit there doing nothing for maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and I start settling back down, thinking that maybe the cough was just leaves in the nearby woods between my neighborhood and this soccer field. So I'm almost fully relaxed, but then I heard the cough again. Then I see something sprint on its back legs across the field faster than I've ever seen anything move before, and it gets to the other end of the field and then continues to stand there on its hind legs. I couldn't see it super well because it was dark and far away. Since I just heard coughing and it was running on 2 legs, I initially thought that it must have been a person, but when it was standing still, I could see that it was too large and weirdly proportioned to be a human. It was also screeching the whole time, sort of, like an incredibly loud horror movie creature screeching that made my ears ring. It looked like its back was to me, so I took the opportunity to pack up and sprint home at that, not wanting to hear this sound anymore, and obviously I was pretty freaked out. I'm also physically disabled and I can move around just fine, but never very quickly. I literally cannot think of another time in my life where I have ever run that fast, though. Now, the only sort of paranormal thing that I believe in is plain old ghosts, so as soon as I got home, I texted all of my friends about it and Googled all that I could. Everyone that I texted reassured me that it was probably just an injured or diseased animal, since that can make deer act weird like that. So that was a little bit reassuring, but At the time, I'm Googling about deer running on their hind legs and screeching their heads off, and while it's a decently documented occurrence, none of the pictures and the videos on any websites are anywhere near what I saw. In fact, the only accounts of experiences just like mine are posts and on other subreddits, and they were about skinwalkers and stuff. Also, 2 additional details that I should add are that, 1, I'm just assuming that it was a deer based on its size. It didn't have antlers or anything. I couldn't really tell what it was, and I'm mainly going with deer because I'm very skeptical about paranormal topics and I don't want to assume that it was anything other than a deer. And 2, I've read descriptions of deer running on their hind legs and I've watched videos of it in fact. But none of the videos that I've seen really match up with just how strangely fast this thing was moving. Like, it was basically a blur running past me. Anyway, to this day I still don't know what it was, but I just wanted to get this out there. Maybe someone knows Appalachian animals better than I do and can reassure me that it was just a sick deer or something. In any case, I hope all of you guys had a happy new year and are all doing well. So I'm not really sure if this would be considered a paranormal story per se, but nothing else really makes sense. Let me explain. My family would go camping every chance that we got, and the place that we'd always go had no natural predators, at least nothing bigger than a fox. My dad specifically chose this spot so us kids, me and my 2 siblings, could sort of frolic through the woods without having to worry too much. This particular trip was during the May long weekend. There was still a considerable amount of snow, so my dad brought our ATVs and some sleds for us. It was the day after we had arrived, and my dad wanted to go on a little trip down the road that we came up. I asked if I could come, and he said sure. We both hopped on his quad, and we set out on our little trip. I forgot to mention too earlier that we had deer around this area. Nothing crazy, but the odd one would wander through our campsite every now and then. You could tell that they had no natural predators though, for sure, since they didn't run away when there was a human around even. And my siblings and I would always manage to get pretty close to one, before my parents yelled at us to stay away from them. Anyway, my dad and I were a few miles away from the campsite when we rounded a corner and came across one of the most gruesome sights that I've ever seen in my entire life. On the side of the road were the pieces of a deer, at least I think it was one. There was blood absolutely everywhere. Worse still, there was steam coming from the remains, which meant that this was a recent kill. My dad is usually a pretty calm guy. Not much can really rattle him, but I could tell that this freaked him out a lot. He was in the process of turning us around when this, screech came from the forest. It was so loud that we both flinched, and I remember searching the forest for the source, but my dad was in the process of hauling butt down the way that we came. It could have been a trick of the light or because I was freaked out, and maybe I was seeing things, but I could have sworn that I saw something running alongside of us, but only for a second or two. I know that I sound absolutely crazy, but the thing genuinely looked like an absolutely enormous dog before it vanished into the trees. My dad traced back to the camp, and we were all packed up and headed to a different location by the end of that day. We never did go back to that campsite after this encounter too. I did ask my dad about it a couple of years ago, and he just said that it was because the new campsite was better than the old one, better trails and whatnot. But honestly, I think he was full of it. I think whatever we encountered that day scared the absolute heck out of him, and I think that whatever I saw, he must have as well. But I, for one, am actually thankful that we never went back. I'm not sure if I would be able to sleep at night, to be honest, after what I saw there. And it still plagues my memories to this day. So I sleep in the basement of a one-story house out in the country. I've never seen or heard anything unexplainable. until, out of nowhere, weird noises could be heard outside of our house one night. About 3 years ago, the first noises were heard by both me and my mum. We had let the dog out around 12 at night and were letting him back in and talking when we heard a sound that no animal could make. It sounded like a large cat that had its throat slit. It was like a gargling meow, and we both immediately stopped talking and looking outside to see if there was anything just outside, because that's where it sounded like it was coming from, just beyond where our house's lights could reach, but we couldn't see anything. It was like something just letting you know that it's there, then not doing anything or making another sound. The next incident happened a couple of months after, when I was sleeping outside my room since I didn't have a bed at the time and the futon couldn't fit through my doorway. It was late at night, I was watching TV, and I heard what sounded like someone moving stuff around just outside of my laundry room. The layout of my basement is pretty open, so from where I was laying I could see almost everything in the basement, except the laundry room and another open area at the bottom of the stairs. So I honestly thought that someone might have come down to get something from the fridge or the freezer, so I just went back to watching TV. But a couple of seconds later, I heard someone walking around barefoot, and since the floor is concrete, you can hear it pretty clearly. So I sat up and thought that somebody was going to turn the corner, but then the walking turned into a full-on sprint, and that was when it happened. I watched as the footsteps ran past in front of me, but nobody was there. They disappeared into our unfinished bathroom and stopped instantly, and when I say instantly, I mean no slowdown in the footsteps, just an abrupt stop. My dog used to sleep in the bathroom, but after that, he refused to even come downstairs. After that, I had my first and last sleep paralysis episode too, where I heard the same footsteps before a pitch-black person on all fours crawled at me and got right in my face before disappearing under the futon. And the final incident happened probably 3 or 4 months later when I was finally back in my room. I was laying in bed when I heard those footsteps again, but it sounded like they were running around sort of aimlessly. After a good minute of this, they stopped in front of my door and it went quiet, but only for a few seconds before my doorknob began to jiggle back and forth. I have never had that sense of dread ever in my life too, and I have never been that scared before. I ran to my door, grabbed the knob, and sat with my back against the door and my feet pushing against the wall opposite. I even looked under the door and I confirmed that there was nothing there. I probably sat there for 30 minutes before I got the courage to move, and throughout those 30 minutes, I kept looking under the door and there was nothing. I slept with a steel bar that night because I was absolutely convinced that there was someone in our house. Since that night, nothing major has happened, but sometimes when I come back into my room and close the door, I'll turn around and my door, for whatever reason, will be open again. So I don't really normally share stories often, but I've been listening to some here, and it sparked an encounter that I had years ago on a solo bike tour that I thought was worth sharing. So it was the spring after I graduated college. I'm 22 and female, and didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I decided to take a pause and ride my bike down the coast from Canada to Mexico. I was pretty nervous to be going by myself, but for the majority of the time I felt safe. Halfway through or so, I got pretty comfortable with sleeping alone in fairly empty campsites and parks, etc. There were even some stretches on the trip that I rode with other bike tourists, and this one encounter, however, brought my guard back up for the remainder for sure. So I was halfway down the Oregon coast and was a mile or so out from the campground that I had planned to stay for the night. There was this notable yellow vintage Ferrari, I think it was, car that had passed me headed in the opposite direction. When I pulled into the campground, I stopped at the information board to look at the map and the fees. As I'm sitting there, I see the yellow car coming down the road and stops where I am. This older guy in his late, maybe 50s or early 60s, gets out and starts looking at the board with me. He's friendly and seems completely normal, charismatic even. He's asking me about my trip and starts mentioning how he's from the area but has never checked out this campground. At this point, I'm still pretty naive. There's plenty of nice people that I've met on the trip that chat me up and ask me about the bike tour. He's talking to me and getting closer, and this part is what starts to make me a bit uneasy. He would repeatedly reach out his hand to shake mine like he was about to leave, but every time he shook my hand, he would grab my forearm with his other hand and do this weird sort of gasp laugh thing. The way that he did it looked absolutely insane, and the arm grasp was very firm. It immediately sent shivers down my spine. But then he suddenly dives into another topic and repeats this freaky handshake maybe 2 more times in between. I realize then that I'm completely out of sight from anyone in the campground, have no phone service, and I'm now very close to him and his open car door. There's a knot in my stomach. I'm on the verge of tears and my voice is shaking with every response. At the time I didn't know why, but something just felt very off about him. I finally speak up loud, hoping somebody can hear me, and tell him that I have to get going, run to my bike and speed to the campground. When I get there, I don't even try to find the hike and bike spots and just throw tent down directly across from the camp host. And thankfully, I didn't see him after that. Again, I had a lot of encounters with random strangers at this point, but none of them terrified me like this one did. I fought with the idea that he was probably just an overly friendly guy, but the fact that he would repeatedly grab my arm like that and laugh like that was frightening. All in all, most people that I met were sweet, and it made me very trusting of others. And even if he was harmless, his actions were a good reminder that I had to be mindful of my vulnerable situation, and I had to be much more alert. So something a little bit eerie, I guess you could say, happened to me one night on night shift when I was closing and doing outside trash, a chore that I have to do because I was closing. I was listening to music since there were no customers and the lot was empty. 2 of my co-workers, cook and manager, were both inside doing what they had to do before leaving. I noticed a red car pulling into a stall, but not all the way. The car was parked in this strange way, kind of sort of sideways and far away from the stall where they would call in, I guess. I noticed it was an elderly couple, and the husband rolls his windows down and says something. I couldn't really hear him, so I paused my music and asked if he could repeat, and it sounded like he said, "Are you here alone?" So I laughed and said no, I wasn't alone. They stayed there for a while before pulling out, but they stopped for such an unusual amount of time in the middle of the lot that it was a bit weird. This was when one of my co-workers walked out, leaving. He's around the same age as me, and we said our goodbyes. As I continued doing the trash, I noticed the car had went back to the main road in front of my workplace, but only to turn back into the lot again, in a sort of slow and unusual way. I started to freak out a bit, and I tried to hurry at this point. I noticed the car was gone for a while, so I thought that they left. So I was heading back to the dumpster, the big one, to throw away the trash bags when I saw it. The red car was right behind the dumpster at the stop sign. It was parked there, and this was when I quickly called my brother and I put him on speaker. I talked so loudly that anyone could hear me, and I was honestly on the verge of tears. Once I hung up though, the car had finally started to move slowly, paused for a moment again, then finally left for good. I don't know what really happened, but I just felt like I was being stalked that night. I don't know if they had good intentions or not, but I realized that my coworker had stayed in his truck with the engine running the whole time. I can't remember exactly, but I do believe that his truck was right next to the dumpster, and he may not have known what was going on, but I'm really thankful that he didn't leave just yet, because I'm kind of coming to grips with the fact that maybe this was an attempted kidnapping or something. This was my very first job, so I don't know if this was common or not, or if the people just were looking out for me or something, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Is this normal, or should I have been more concerned? I haven't told anyone at work about what happened, and I'm wondering if I should. What do you guys think? So I'll need to explain some context here, so bear with me. Rock Island is a state park located at the tip of Door County, Wisconsin on Lake Michigan. It's a pretty difficult place to get to, in fact. To get to the island, you have to take a car ferry from Ellison Bay to Washington Island, drive across Washington Island to Jackson Harbor, then take a pedestrian-only ferry to Rock Island. No vehicles or bikes are allowed on Rock Island. Now, even though the island is relatively small at about 975 acres, it has had an interesting history. In the early 1600s, it was inhabited by a tribe of Native Americans as well as a small fishing village of European settlers. The two groups, they didn't trust each other and did have a few bad encounters that almost led to violence, but for the most part they lived peacefully together on the island. By the 1640s, the Native Americans had migrated to other parts of Wisconsin. Shortly after they had left the island, some settlers from the fishing village reported seeing a new group of people on the island. They seemed to be more white settlers, but they wore strange clothes and kept to themselves. No one from the fishing village was ever able to talk to one of these new settlers or even find where they were living. It was around this time too that strange things started to happen in the village. Several animals, it's not mentioned what they were, but maybe it was pigs or chickens kept by the settlers, were found slaughtered in the village and seemed to have been used to make markings in blood on some of the buildings in the village. On a different night, a building used for preserving meat burned down. The villagers felt that these things must have been done by these new people on the island, and they intended to find them, but after a thorough search of the island, including the wooded inland area, they never found a single person. These strange occurrences seemed to stop soon after the search, and none of the other settlers were ever seen again as well. In 1836, the lighthouse that was built on the northern part of the island, after construction was finished, the lighthouse was inspected and it was reported back that the material of which the lighthouse and the dwelling are made are of the best quality and that the work is done in a substantive and workmanlike manner. David E. Corbin was appointed the first keeper of the light on December 19, 1837. Only 3 years later, in 1840, despite the apparent quality of the construction of the lighthouse, David Corbin started to complain that the plaster started to fall off the building, and some sort of liquid would ooze through the cracks, leaving the house constantly damp. Corbin was completely alone most of the time at the lighthouse, and some have said when visiting him that he would stare at a certain wall and sometimes spoke vaguely of the other visitors. In 1845, after 8 years of relative solitude at the lighthouse, an inspector visited the lighthouse keeper and determined that, while Corbin was fulfilling his duties, he was acting strange. The official report says that the inspector ordered Corbin to take a 25-day leave of absence to find a wife to live with him at the lighthouse. However, some think that the inspector was startled by Corbin's mental state caused by years of solitude and thought that it would be best that he spend some time away from the island altogether. In 1852, Corbin reportedly fell ill and died that December in that same lighthouse. He was buried in a small cemetery just south of the lighthouse. Now, the next lighthouse keeper also reported the surprisingly quick deterioration of the lighthouse. Some friends that had visited the new keeper said that he would talk of seeing strange things in the house at night, but he wouldn't elaborate on what he had seen. In 1858, after only 22 years of service, the original lighthouse was torn down and a new one was built. From that point on, the lighthouse keepers were required to have an assistant keeper or a family with them at the lighthouse. No strange occurrences were further reported in the lighthouse logbook, outside of strong storms and occasional shipwrecks, except on January 20, 1876. The keeper at the time, named Betts, reported that he saw two men attempting to row to the mainland from Washington Island. He wrote that a terrible storm came up shortly after their departure, and they never made it to their destination. Over 3 months later, on May 3rd of 1876, Betts wrote that the two men were lost last January have since been seen several times, once from Caney Lighthouse and once from Jacksonport. The men are apparently frozen stiff and sitting upright in the boat among a mass of ice. At last account, they were still adrift. There's not much hope that they'll be found and buried. By 1900, most of the island's inhabitants left for better fishing areas on Lake Michigan. In 1910, a successful business owner and inventor, Chester Thordarson, purchased all of the island except for the land that the lighthouse occupied in the north. He used the island as a private summer retreat from his business in Chicago. He is responsible for the unique and mystifying buildings and structures that are still on the island today. On the south end of the island, he built a giant stone wall that has a boathouse on the lower level. A stone water tower was built on the east side of the island, and an imposing wooden gate was constructed on the west end of the island. The great hall that was used to store Thordarson's immense book collection was there too. He had over 11,000 books, and it's rumored that he possessed some very rare books on the occult in his collection too. Thordarson died of heart failure on January 6, 1945, though some have speculated that he saw something that actually scared him to death. I couldn't find any writings from Thordarson, however, that mentioned him experiencing anything strange on the island. After his death, though, multiple churches and universities were interested in his book collection, but he had willed it to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, providing that they had to purchase it for $300,000, which they did. Some of this history is hard to find on the internet, but there are a couple of binders in the Great Hall that has a lot of this documented. Thordarson's personal papers are housed in the archive section of the State Historical Society of Wisconsin as well. Now, all of this history I gave is just to provide a little bit of context for experiences that I have had, directly or indirectly, on Rock Island. In August of 2021, I took my first and last trip to Rock Island. After taking 2 ferry rides, I arrived on the island at about 2 p.m. I had booked the remote campsite E, which is a backpacking site that is a little over a mile from the dock. I took my time hiking out to the site to enjoy the scenery and took a couple of breaks just due to how heavy my pack was. I was definitely packed more for camping than hiking, to be honest, but I got to my site, set up my tent, got everything situated, and started gathering sticks and driftwood from the beach so I could start a fire. On my third trip back from the beach, before I got back to my campsite, I heard a single, sort of high-pitched squeal noise coming from the forest. It didn't sound close, but it was such an unusual sound that I stopped in my tracks and waited for a good 30 seconds, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't, so I continued back to my site, and when I got back, I began working on getting a fire started. The remote camping sites on Rock Island are pretty well spaced out. Sites C, D, and E are grouped together, but there's probably 100 yards between each site. There's not a real trail connecting the 3 sites directly, but enough people have walked along the ridge between the 3 sites that there's an obvious path now. As I was setting some sticks up on my fire ring, something caught my eye though, and I looked up. Fairly far away, it looked like it might have been at maybe site D or a little further, was a person running in my direction. My first thought was, well, that's odd, because like I said, it's not even really a trail that they were on. Then my mind just went up to, well, there must be something wrong and this person needs help. They got a little closer and it looked like maybe it was a woman in loose grey clothes, maybe a hoodie. It was still far enough away that I couldn't really make out the details at this point. But I quickly stood up from the crouching position that I was in, and just as I did, I heard that high-pitched squeal noise again. This time it was behind me, and it was much closer. This startled me quite a bit, so I turned around to look behind me. I scanned the trees for a couple of seconds, but didn't see or hear anything. I turned back around because I knew the running person must be getting close now, but when I did, they were gone. Again, I stood there and scanned the trees, but I didn't see them anywhere. I was honestly so confused that I was just kind of frozen for a few seconds. It was all very strange, but I was able to reason it out in my head that it was a fellow camper from Site C or D that was maybe running to pit the toilet that was a couple of 100 yards west of the sites or something like that. I tried to forget about it, but it really bothered me, I'm not gonna lie. I really did not like whatever that squeal noise was too, and I don't know, I just felt strange all of a sudden. With some effort though, I decided to let it go and started my fire. I had a quick meal and a couple of adult beverages and then decided to take a little walk. I hadn't seen Site C or D yet, so I thought that I would check those out and see if I did have some neighbors camping nearby or something. Site D was empty. I did see the path that led from that site to the main trail and pit toilet, so that made me feel a little bit less uneasy about the runner. I figured that it was maybe someone from Site C that took a strange way to get to the main trail by going through Site D or something. It didn't make a lot of sense, obviously, because I probably still should have seen them, but it made me feel better. I continued on to Site C and saw that there was a tent up. I really didn't want to bother anyone, but I just thought maybe I would go over with the excuse that I would introduce myself as a camping neighbor from Site E and see if anyone looked like they might have been the person running earlier. I came up on the site and there was a couple sitting at the picnic table. Neither of them looked like they would have been the person that I saw running, but I introduced myself nevertheless and they introduced themselves too. They were probably in their mid-30s and they were really nice too. Both of them seemed to be pretty drunk, but not quite off their face yet, I guess you could say. I didn't ask about the runner in the end, or the squealing noises, because I thought that might be weird. And in the end, I just wished them a good night, and I walked back to my tent. When I got back, I had a cigar and a few more drinks. It got dark, and it started as a perfect night. The sky was clear, and I was just staring up and looking at the millions of stars, and I felt better about everything from earlier and felt a little bit stupid about the whole thing and decided in the end to just get some sleep. It was a long day, and so I fell asleep almost immediately as well. At around 2:30 in the morning though, I woke up to a huge boom of thunder. It started downpouring like crazy. The wind picked up and the temperature dropped, and I love camping in the rain, but I do not like camping in a lightning storm. A pretty big storm came through and I was starting to worry a bit. The wind was whipping at my tent and the ground was shaking from the thunder and the lightning, and I didn't feel good about being out there in a tent and felt pretty exposed. The storm lasted for about an hour as well before it became just a sort of light and steady drizzle. I was starting to fall back to sleep too when it was then that I heard that squeal noise again. I opened up my eyes wide in the dark and I just laid there, silent. There was another loud squeal noise and it was pretty close. Now, I knew that there were no real dangerous animals on Rock Island. There are deer and porcupines, but nothing like bear or wolves. Knowing that still didn't make me feel better though, because there was just something about that squeal that it just seemed, I don't know, weird to me. I didn't like it. I say squeal though because that's the best that I can describe it. It sounded to me a lot like a pig squeal, and while I honestly don't know that much about pig noises, that's what I thought of when I heard it. An injured or perhaps angry pig squeal. In any case, I continued to lay in my tent, and that's when I started to hear footsteps outside my tent. It was still raining, so the sounds were a little bit buried in the sound of the rain, but it definitely sounded like a somewhat large animal or human walking around. At that, I sat up in my tent and I took a knife out that I had just to feel better. In my head, I just kept saying, "You know it's just an animal, it's fine. There's nothing in these woods that can hurt you." I listened as the footsteps started moving away from my tent. I just sat there being still, holding my knife for maybe 10 minutes without hearing anything else. I started thinking to myself, "It's fine. It's just an animal. You're being stupid and you just need to get some sleep." I was just about to lay back down too when there was a very loud squeal, and this time it was right outside of my tent. it felt like my heart just stopped and a shiver went down my spine. My heart was beating so hard my entire body was pulsing, and I felt it in my ears. It took everything in me, but I forced out a "get out of here," not shouting, but a stern and mean-sounding voice as I could make at that moment. And after that, I didn't hear any more squeals or footsteps the rest of the night. But I also didn't get any sleep. I just sat there in my tent for maybe an hour before I laid down. Eventually, the rain stopped, and I kept laying there until the sun came up, just listening. All that time, I was trying to reassure myself that I was just being stupid and that it was just an animal. It was probably around 7 a.m. before I decided that I had to get out of my tent to relieve myself. And as soon as I stepped outside of my tent, I saw that my picnic table had been turned over and was now upside down. When I saw this, I surprisingly calmly thought, "Oh, okay, this is enough. I'm leaving the island today." I checked my surroundings and nothing else seemed out of place. I eventually reasoned with myself that the wind must have blown the table over during the storm. It still seemed a little bit strange because the table was pretty heavy and I felt like I would have heard the table flip over that night, but I made some cold instant coffee and had a bite to eat, started to feel a bit better about the whole thing, and then I decided to go for a hike. I admit too that I get easily scared when I'm camping by myself in the woods. Maybe that's natural, but after I had some coffee and food and the sun came out, I realized that nothing I'd heard or saw was really anything that couldn't be explained. Other than not getting a good night's sleep, I was having a pretty good time, to be honest. The reason that I came to the island in the first place was to hike the 7-mile Thordarson's Loop Trail that has a lot of interesting things to see, and I was excited to start the hike today. So I packed a few things in my backpack and I started off. Now, fairly close to my side is the water tower. I have no idea how it originally worked or why it had to be a tower, but it's an impressive building with a fireplace that looked like someone had recently had a fire in it. A little further down the trail was a cemetery where 2 sisters and a few others are buried. It's believed that there are still more buried here in the unmarked graves too, but these likely are some of the settlers from the old fishing village. The island has 3 cemeteries in total. There's one by the beach, and that's where Chester Thordarson is buried. There's one in the eastern part of the island where the 2 sisters are buried. And there's one on the northern part of the island where the original lighthouse keeper, David E. Corbin, is buried too. There is also at least one Native American burial area on the island too, but no one knows exactly where that is. Anyway, I kept walking on the trail until I came to a nice scenic overlook area with a bench where I sat down and drank some water. I started to hear some talking on the trail ahead of me, but I couldn't see anyone yet. There was a bend in the trail and the trees were thick, so I sat on the bench waiting for these people to come around the bend. The voices were coming closer, and I could tell that they weren't speaking English, but I couldn't place what the language it might have been was, and both voices were very, very deep and sort of guttural. Then, back deep in the woods, I heard a loud and quick sort of ooh sound. Immediately, both the voices that I was listening to responded with their own oohs, and I kind of smiled because it sounded like these 2 heard whatever it was in the woods and they were trying to be funny and mock it by responding. I got off the bench, put my backpack on, and I started walking in the direction further down the trail where the voices were coming from. But the strangest thing is that I never found those people. That was really weird too, because I could have sworn that they must have been on that trail somewhere really close to me. The rest of the hike went very well though. I visited the cemetery where David E. Corbin is buried. I took a self-guided tour of the lighthouse and I passed the wooden gate that apparently used to be part of a larger structure. I walked by the Great Hall and dock area from where I arrived on the island, visited some of the other structures on the island too, came across the cemetery where Chester Thordarson is buried, then finished the loop by returning to my campsite. It was a really nice hike with a lot to see and wasn't especially difficult, but by the end of it, I was tired. I did walk down to Campsite C to ask the couple that I spoke with the night before how they did with the storm during the night, but they had packed up and left by this time, so unfortunately I didn't get to talk to them. I was disappointed too because I really wanted to ask them about the squealing noises during the night as well. Anyway, the rest of the evening was pretty uneventful. I built a fire, made some meals, had a cigar, and I had some drinks. As soon as it got dark though, I was ready for bed since I had so little sleep the night before. So I got in my tent and quickly fell asleep, and I might have been asleep for about 3 hours when I woke up suddenly again and was immediately fully alert. Nothing that I was aware of caused me to wake up, but I don't know, I just felt like something was wrong. I sat up in my tent, and this part is a little hard to explain, so bear with me. So, a feeling of just complete dread washed over me all of a sudden. It was unlike anything that I'd ever felt before. It felt like there was something in the tent with me, and I could feel that it was angry, seething with anger, rageful even, and I could feel its hatred for me. It felt like something very bad was about to happen, and I just couldn't do anything about it. I started to shiver uncontrollably, and then there was a smell of like garbage or rotten meat, and it got stronger and stronger to the point where I almost threw up, but couldn't because I was just completely frozen. I'd never felt so exposed and helpless apart from that point in my life, and I stared forward at nothing, just frozen. And the weird thing is that I accepted that whatever was about to happen to me was just going to happen. It was like my brain telling me that whatever is about to happen, even if it is death, will at least be relief. And then, all of a sudden, I just blacked out. At least, I have to assume I passed out because that's all I remember until I woke up at about 10 a.m. that morning. Now, when I woke up, I was laying outside of my sleeping bag on top of it, and my legs were in a really sort of unnatural and uncomfortable position. I was on my back with my left leg straight out, and my right leg was bent so that my foot was up against my left knee. My heart started pounding, but I kept thinking to myself that it was a dream. It must have been. But I'm leaving right now. But it was a dream. I packed up everything very quickly, and I started back toward the dock to catch the first boat off the island at this point. But since the first boat from Washington Island doesn't arrive until 10:30 in the morning, I had to kill a little bit of time around the Great Hall and dock area. I wanted to get off that island though, so bad, but I did feel a little better just being out of the woods, I'll admit, and that I could see other people as well. I sat down on a bench a little to the east of the dock and lit a cigar just to give me something to do while trying not to think about the night before. I was sitting a few minutes and scanning out over the water when I was startled by someone behind me saying hi. I jumped and was really embarrassed when the person came around saying, Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I saw you smoking and just came over to ask if you had a lighter." I felt a bit like an idiot and told him that was fine. I just didn't sleep well last night and was kind of zoned out, and I handed him my lighter. He thanked me, lit a cigar, and then handed the lighter back to me. We made some small talk and then started talking about the unusual things that you might talk about. He said that he was from the Madison area. We talked about the storms that we'd been having, and he seemed to be a real outdoorsy kind of guy as well, and talked about his plans to move to Washington Island. It was a nice normal conversation and kind of took my mind off the night that I'd just had for a little bit. He seemed like a pretty nice guy. Then, naturally, he asked me what site I'd been staying at. I told him that I was staying at Site E the last 2 nights, and he said that he usually books that site, but I must have reserved it before him. He said that he had booked Site D the last 2 nights, and I was surprised by this because no tent or anything was at Site D the 2 times that I walked past the site. I told him this, and he said that he comes to the island a few times a year and you have to sort of book a site, but he actually camps at a different area on the island. I asked him where he camps, and he told me that most of the time he camps in the East Cemetery, but he also likes to camp in the woods south of the lighthouse. He told me that he hikes about halfway down the Fernwood Trail and just heads north into the woods where he finds a place to camp. He said that one time he found the ruins of a small log house in those woods, and he's going to try and find it again and camp inside of it. At this point, I started to change my opinion about this guy, and I wanted to change the subject, but then he asked me if I heard the screeches in the woods, and at that, I took a second to reply and knew exactly what he was talking about. I told him that I had and asked if he knew what it was. This time, he took a second to reply, and I saw his face change. He looked as if he was thinking if he should tell me something, almost like a secret, I guess. But with no expression at all on his face, he just said matter-of-factly, "A demon lives on this island." Now, under any other circumstance, I would have laughed this off for sure, but not after what I had experienced the night before. He looked at me and must have seen the anxiety and the fear that I was feeling. He surprised me by letting out a quick laugh, and then he asked me if I had saw anything that night. I told him that I hadn't seen anything, and he stared at me like he was trying to figure something out. I felt like he could tell that I'd experienced something, and at this point, I was ready for the conversation to be over. But then he told me that he had seen something in the cemetery that night. Now, his face and mood kind of changed again, like he was trying to confide in me. I really did not want to ask the question, but I knew that he wanted me to ask it, so I asked him what he saw in the cemetery, but my voice was shaky. Then I could tell that he had changed his mind about telling me. He actually looked at me with empathy and told me that what he saw was hard to explain, but if I was afraid of the screeching noises, he didn't think that I should go near the cemetery. I didn't say anything right away, but he said 4 words without any context: "Keepers of the flame." At that, I looked at my cigar and the ash was long. I put it out and told him that I was going to wait by the dock for the boat, and he nodded and I started to walk away. After a few steps, he said, "Hey," and I turned around to look at him. He just said, "Don't come back here, okay?" I turned around at that and started walking again. I don't know if that was a warning or a friendly suggestion, but whatever it was, I took it to heart. I was definitely not going to come back to Rock Island. When I did get home, though, I looked up Keepers of the Flame as it pertained to Rock Island. I found 3 things that he could have been referring to, in fact. The name of the Native Americans that lived on the island. It could be translated to Keepers of the Flame. The lighthouse keepers on the island were sometimes referred to as Keepers of the Flame. But then, there was also a 19th century cult that was said to visit the island from time to time that called themselves the Keepers of the Flame. I know that hundreds of people visit Rock Island every year, and they have a great time camping, hiking the trails, and exploring Chester Thordarson's buildings, but my humble suggestion is this: do not go to Rock Island.